All right, Alexander, let's...
You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition, our last edition this week, by the way, of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those divided states, as well as across our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And that's right, folks. Just a quick reminder, just to start this show off, we're not going to be on the air tomorrow or Friday. So due to Thanksgiving and Black Friday, we're taking both those days off. We will, however, be back on Monday. So look forward to that, and I hope you enjoy the show today. Anyway, without further ado, in the news this morning, well, first up in COVID news, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's the CDC, has updated its guidelines to recommend that Americans looking to travel abroad take a total of 3 COVID-19 tests before and after their flights. Before and after. At least 30 gyms and fitness studios in Philadelphia are demanding that the city allows them to stay open in order to keep their businesses alive during the coronavirus pandemic. They created a group called the Philadelphia Fitness Coalition, which on Sunday launched an appeal to officials regarding the recent shutdown and new restrictions on the city. The coalition gathered outside of City Hall on Tuesday, asking for a meeting with Mayor Jim Kenney. In El Paso County, Texas, they've ordered a new curfew starting Thanksgiving Eve as the city continues to grapple with rising COVID-19 cases and so many deaths that 10 additional morgue units have been brought in to accommodate the surge. The situation is so dire that 1,500 additional medical professionals in the National Guard have been deployed to help. Even inmates have been enlisted to assist in morgue operations as the death total grows. The curfew took effect at 12:01 a.m. on Wednesday and will run from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. until November 30th, El Paso County Judge Ricardo Samaniego announced at a Tuesday afternoon news conference. New Mexico lawmakers on Tuesday passed a bipartisan coronavirus relief bill that will deliver a one-time $1,200 check to all types of unemployed workers and up to $50,000 for certain businesses. The bill also provides smaller stimulus checks to immigrants without legal status in the country and dependents, as well as additional funds for food banks, virus testing, and contact tracing efforts. In transition news, Arizona Republican Party Chairwoman Kelly Ward filed a lawsuit Tuesday seeking an inspection of both mail-in ballot signatures and duplicated ballots in Metro Phoenix, alleging election officials didn't give legal observers enough access to ballot processing. The lawsuit filed against President-elect Joe Biden's 11 electors in Arizona also alleged some suburbs on the southeastern edge of Maricopa County had an unusually high number of duplicated ballots, and that the election results in that area were quote-unquote strongly inconsistent with voter registration and historical voting data. Ballots are duplicated when they are damaged or too illegible to run through a tabulator. The lawsuit alleged the software used in processing such electronic ballots was inaccurate and would pre-fill Biden's name on ballots more often than it did President Donald Trump. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan plans to sign a new city budget that includes an 18% cut to the city's police department funding. That's according to a statement issued by her office Tuesday. A vote by the Seattle City Council approved the budget Monday 8-1, with council member Kshama Sawant voting against. She had pushed for the full 50% cut to the police budget that protesters had demanded over the summer following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Prospective tourists and visitors from more than 20 countries, mostly in Africa, could pay as much as a $15,000 bond to obtain a U.S. visa under a new rule from the Trump administration. The requirements unveiled on Tuesday, the State Department said, are designed to send, quote-unquote, a message to certain nations to encourage their citizens to abide by the conditions of their U.S. visas. The State Department said it selected countries whose citizens have high rates of remaining in the U.S. after their visas have expired. Under the 6-month pilot program starting December 24th, U.S. consular officials could start requiring applications for B1 and B2, applicants for B1 and B2 visas who hail from the selected countries to pay a $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 bond. That seems pretty steep to me, Jamarl. What's your take?
What, a bond for, how much was it again? What was the number?
Between $5,000 and $15,000 of a bond just to gain entrance, just basically to gain a visa to the U.S. from certain African countries. Now, I'm guessing.
It sounds like they just don't want him to come in. That's what it sounds like. It's almost like if you go to, let's say you go to a restaurant or something, and the restaurant, you want extra something. The restaurant says, yeah, we have that, but it's going to cost $10. We offer it, we just don't want you to do it. That's what it sounds like. They want to create a bar so high that the people who come here are of a particular type in the heads of the United States, or they just can't come at all. That's what it sounds like.
I mean, the stated explanation here is that they're trying to keep away people who they say are unusually likely to just try to stay here. Yeah. But it just sounds on its face kind of racist. It sounds on its face like they're trying to keep people from certain. I mean, I'm granted, I don't actually know that it is. It definitely implicitly is. I'm not sure that was what was running through their minds.
Well, to be fair, challenge the point for the moment. Is it true? Now, if you have, say for the moment, you have people from various countries, and those people might have a propensity to stay. Let's say the country is the United States, and let's say you were looking at numbers, and it showed, all right, of all the people around the world, the people from, let's say, 5 countries have a higher propensity to overrun their visas and just stay in the United States. Is that enough data or enough of a reason to do something like this? Or is there a better way to try to deal with that issue?
I mean, and as we've had so many guests on to talk about recently, the policies the United States is engaged in different countries in Africa seem like they would increase the likelihood of people in those countries trying to come to the United States. Yeah. So it's like we've kind of destabilized and disrupted this region. And it's not, obviously, not just us. You look at the early, 19th century colonialization of Africa as largely European nations with some from the U.S. But in the past century, it seems to have shifted in large part and been a bit top heavy when it comes to the U.S.'s involvement. But still, I think the point holds. It's like we're destabilizing, same thing with Mexico, of course, destabilizing these countries
and radically.
Yeah. Yeah, and then saying they can't come in. Anyway, a lot more to that conversation, but just that's the real quick. Yes, to answer your question directly, Jamarl. Yes, there are undoubtedly many better ways we could have handled this one. In other news, on Tuesday in Scotland has become the first country to make menstrual products free in public facilities nationwide. The Scottish Parliament confirmed in a tweet on Tuesday that the bill had passed unanimously. According to the Parliament's website, the law requires the Scottish government to set up a universal system so that anyone in need of period products can get them for free. Schools, colleges, and universities will also be required to make free menstrual products available in restrooms. Local authorities and education providers will be responsible for ensuring free products are made available under the law. Jamarl, this is I have a much more nuanced take than this one, but I read that first sentence. Have you seen The Shining before?
Yeah.
That one scene, you know the scene I'm talking about. I literally read that first sentence, and involuntarily that scene came to mind. Completely inappropriate, but if you've seen The Shining, you probably know what I'm talking about.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think I know the scene you're talking about. That's funny.
Yeah.
Look, I don't have any issue with this. I love this.
Of course not. No.
I mean, you're gonna have some people because look, the reality of it is that if you have money, if you have cash, if you have wealth, there's certain things you don't even think about that you can afford. And if you don't, there are things that you do have to think about that you may have difficulty affording. And so, what is the point of government? And let's not even use the term government. What is the point of a collective group of people that come together from the society itself? If that collective group of people that come together, made up by that society, can't make a choice and do things that it determines to be in the best interest of the public, especially if it assuages some of the hard edges of our system. So, yes, it's funny, but applause.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, could talk about this. And again, there are much more nuanced takes to be had, but I just thought I'd throw that into the pot.
It was funny.
So to speak. Yeah, yes. Indonesia's Anti-Corruption Commission said it arrested the country's fisheries minister on Wednesday amid an investigation into exports of lobster larvae. Maritime Affairs and Fisheries Minister Edi Prabowo was arrested upon arrival at the Jakarta Soekarno-Hatta International Airport from a working visit to the United States. The deputy chairman of the Corruption Eradication Commission, Nurul Gufron, told Kompas TV the arrest is related to lobster seed exports, end quote, without elaborating in comments aired on the station. I'm going to repeat that one. This is like one of those puzzles, one of those riddles even. The arrest is related to lobster seed exports, quote, end quote. He said investigators were still questioning Prabowo and another announcement would be made later Wednesday. Prabowo earlier this year rolled back a ban on lobster larvae exports put in place by his predecessor. That decision sparked criticism from his predecessors and activists over sustainability concerns. So this is actually, you can't trivialize this, but the harvesting of sort of vital resources from wildlife, whether it's like blue bottle crabs, for instance, where we harvest their blood and then just discard them, and this has led to massive population losses over the decades, or in this case apparently lobster larva or lobster seed, as Nurul Gufron put it. It's that can have pretty traumatic effects on the ecologies. Anyway, got other headlines to get through here. The Dow has hit an all-time high. Wall Street busted through its latest milestone on Tuesday when the Dow Jones Industrial Average topped 30,000 for the first time. The Dow rose 454.97 points, or 1.5%, to close at 30,046. Investors were encouraged by progress in the development of coronavirus vaccines and news that the transition of power to President-elect Joe Biden is beginning. Traders also welcomed word that Biden has selected Janet Yellen, a widely respected former Federal Reserve Chair, as Treasury Secretary. This was, as was speculated yesterday, as we were talking about in headlines. Jamarl, the Dow Jones just hit an all-time high, and yet, if I'm remembering correctly, aren't like mortgages in forbearance for a little bit over the next month, and then that goes away.
Yes.
And then we have this sort of pending like straw house, bail house.
Some mortgages
could very quickly come down in the gale of whatever financial uncertainty follows. Yeah, what's going to happen there? What do you think?
So there's some mortgages, but not all. And rents, like from the point of like apartments and everything else, those are not. I mean, you have like what, 30% of the population that couldn't pay their rent or something like that, or had difficulty paying their rents. Millions at this point are being queued up for evictions. And, you know, the wild part about this is, even though Dow is going through the roof, you know, there's a level, it's like Dow is not our society, right? I mean, you can see that so clear now, where you have this clear aspect of one part that is out of a job, may lose their house, we're at food banks, and you have this other part where the society, where the Dow is through the roof. How does that work? And how do people reconcile this notion that Dow is somehow commiserate with the real economy? And by the way, same thing with student loans. Within a month or two, that's off the table too, where those are going to come back in full force. But hey, the stock market.
It's true. Yeah, it's but hey, the stock market, exactly. Yeah, I said mortgage is the real thing here. I would say, and mortgages are important. You have this like cascading chain of expected payments that you know, and a similar way to what happened in 2008, in a potentially very similar way, actually. You're unable to keep up this chain of debts and expected income, and that can just have a cascading impact too as it goes through the system. But of course, the same holds for rents. A bunch of people start getting evicted. That's going to be very nasty. And I wonder if we're getting set up for a similar dynamic to what happened in 2008 when Obama gained entrance to the presidency, where he was dealing, the sort of narrative here is that he was dealing with the financial crisis that Bush made. I'm curious if we're going to see something similar, like a similar narrative play out with Biden, a horrible, tragic farce repetition going on here, where Biden paints himself as dealing with the horrible economic scenario that Trump set up for him. Very possibly, very likely. Anyway, I'm going to say very likely, but very possibly. Coinbase, just a few months after launching margin trading on Coinbase Pro, the company is disabling the feature. Margin trading lets you trade on leverage, but it works both ways. Margin trading also lets you multiply your gains and your losses. Starting on November 25th to 2 p.m. Pacific, users won't be able to place new margin trades. Existing margin positions will expire over the coming days and weeks. Once those positions expire, margin trading will be disabled for good. The company is following guidance from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, trying to maintain some connection with America's legal system there. As so much of this is like a Wild West, or at least has been for a long time. In any event, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are about to be going into a break. Again, folks, I'm going to be blasting this out throughout the show, not continuously, but we're going to be off tomorrow. We're going to be off Friday. We will be back Monday. So if you listen in tomorrow or the next day and you don't hear us, don't freak out. We'll be back soon enough. In any event, we're going into a break. Be back in just a minute with Jamarl Thomas's monologue. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us the like and definitely share the video or the audio. And if you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Yesterday, Donald Trump has basically, even though he hasn't necessarily conceded from the standpoint of body language and from the standpoint of his actions, he has, for all intents and purposes, conceded. There's something about a broken man that is, believe it or not, sad. On Deep Space Nine, one of my favorite episodes, especially when he goes to the point of war, Worf is captured. Worf is being forced to fight. Now, people who watch Star Trek, Worf is a Klingon warrior, and this is kind of a warrior culture and whatnot. Jem'Hadar, also warrior culture. And so when they captured him, they basically put him in a hall where he had to fight one Jem'Hadar after the next, each being better and more proficient without giving him any opportunity to really rest. So as he's going through one after the next, he's getting injured, he's having broken bones, broken ribs, and he's still getting into the ring and is still fighting and is still winning. And it gets to the point where he fights the last guy. It's the last guy. There's only one guy left, and that's the guy in charge. And he beats the stuffing out of Worf, breaks him, hurts him. And Worf keeps getting up. And one of the other Klingons is there and says, "Stay down. Your honor has been fulfilled." And Worf pushes his arm away and still tries to stand up. The Jem'Hadar stands there and looks at him and says, "I can't beat this man. I can only kill him." Now, a little thing can be like, "Oh, love that. I love that." The distinction between the two. I can't beat him. I can kill him. Kill him is trivial at this point. We have all sorts of weapons. I can do it. But that doesn't really get me what I want. I lose this because ultimately I can't break him. Breaking is different. Breaking is sad. Yesterday, Donald Trump gave this press conference. And in the press conference, he kind of gets across where it's a mask that he's putting on. The pain of it is very clear. I want to show you something a little bit earlier where he pardoned a turkey. This was back in 2016. Let's hear the clip with Donald Trump pardoning this turkey. Tell me if anything of this sounds familiar.
Today's lucky bird and guest of honor is named Peas, along with his alternate named Carrots. The children will understand that. The winner of this vote was decided by a fair and open election conducted on the White House website. This was a fair election. Unfortunately, Carrots refused to concede and demanded a recount, and we're still fighting with Carrots. And I will tell you, we've come to a conclusion. Carrots, I'm sorry to tell you, the result did not change.
I'm sorry, the result did not change. That sounds so familiar. Who knew that the jab turkey that Donald Trump was talking about was himself? There was another press conference that Trump gave yesterday, and this is a press conference where it became clear he lost. It became clear that he accepted that loss. It burns. It hurts. And the mask that Donald Trump wears is not sufficient enough to cover the fact that it burns and that it hurts. Let's play the clip. Trump the Broken.
Absolutely incredible. It's nothing like that has ever happened medically, and I think people are acknowledging that, and it's having a big effect. But the stock market's just broken 30,000. Never been broken, that number. That's a sacred number, 30,000. Nobody thought they'd ever see it. That's the 9th time since the beginning of 2020, and it's the 48th time that we've broken records during the Trump administration. And I just want to congratulate all the people within the administration that work so hard. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the people of our country, because there are no people like you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, he didn't take any questions or anything else. I would imagine it burns. In that moment, as I watched that, it's one thing to hear the clip. It's another thing to see it, to see his cadence, to see the way he acts, to see the mask that he's putting on, to see the way that particular confidence, that bravado, just can't get to the level that he typically enjoys. A broken man. And in an unguarded moment, I watched that, and there was sympathy. Strange, bewildering sympathy. It's one thing to have Trump with a certain degree of bravado and he goes out and he pushes back. That's one thing. And on something like that, I can heap a certain amount of scorn at the individual as they push back on the fact that I'm pushing scorn. Everybody is there. Everybody's pushing. Everybody has their points of view. But broken, for some reason, is different to me. I had a friend of mine I used to play chess with. Him and I used to go back and forth, back and forth. And at the point where I got where I could debone him, and he understood I could debone him, he broke. And playing him was no longer as fun. Because seeing the light die from his eyes with him angry and everything else was a better scenario than him just not having the fight in him. I felt kind of that way with this. And then, split second later, I got my mind right. This is the same guy that when he got in office, he went on a mission or sent the SEAL team on a mission, on a commando raid. One that Obama wouldn't do, by the way, that ends up killing 30 people, including an 8-year-old child who sat there and bled to death for 2 hours as her grandparents watched, or as the people around them watched, in addition to the 30 other people that he killed, the overwhelming majority, women, children, civilians. These are, this is the guy, so my sympathy is going to be somewhat, let's just call it evaporated. The same guy that decided to shut down the economy or shut down the government because he wanted to get a wall built, unnecessary wall built, and was willing to furlough these workers, meaning these workers not getting paid for months on end for a political stunt that Donald Trump is pushing through. This is the guy that wanted to get rid of DACA and was using ICE almost like this weird Gestapo force or neo-Gestapo force, going through rounding up people. There were situations where people were being pulled out of the hospital, people being pulled from their jobs, where you had kids at school not knowing where their parents are because their parents had just been picked up and dropped into a facility. Facilities that were unclean, arguments that were being made that not having soap or toothpaste or feminine products still constitutes a safe and sanitary environment. That was this administration. These were the same guys that were trying to end Obamacare in the middle of a pandemic. Right now, they're trying to end it. And very well, it might. Obamacare left 20 million people without health care. And that number only increased. And the idea that you're going to get rid of that during the pandemic is appalling. The tax cuts that were given while raising taxes on the poor. And this is, again, after 95% of the income gains went to the top 1% in the previous administration. You had income inequality that was beyond anything that we've ever seen in this country. And yet, on top of that, we're going to add more. I'm making the point that Donald Trump has done one thing after the next in this presidency that had a very clear point of view that was not in the interests of the regular Americans. It was very clear in the interests of oligarchs and people who were within the standpoint of his clique. The allegiance to Israel, the killing of Soleimani that could have ended up bringing and dragging this country into a war, the continued support of the Yemen war. Yes, Donald Trump is talking about bringing the troops home, but he also burned the crops in order to force starvation in Syria, or for that matter, stealing the oil. I'm making the point that Donald Trump has done some radically horrible things. Not, by the way, all that much different than the other presidents. I know people and Democrats want to say that. But even within the context of this presidency, he has done some horrible things. And my sympathies will go to the people that were at the bad ends of those horrible things, including the 250,000 that are no longer here, the 10 million that are infected, the additional 100,000 that's probably going to get affected as a result of his inaction and his incompetence. Yeah, I got my mind right. That's not sympathy at all. Like I said, the jive turkey that Donald Trump was talking about in 2016 was himself, and he will not be missed. And unfortunately, the greatest sad aspect of this is that Biden is probably not going to be much better. Shane, what do you think? Am I bleeding heart on this? Like I said, the bleeding heart lasted for all of 2 nanoseconds, but it was shockingly there. What do you think about this? I mean, I watched this and it looked like he was putting on a facade, and the facade wasn't necessarily lasting all that well. And he didn't even take questions after this. He probably was going to break down in tears if he did, or he tried.
So on a personal level, it's good to know that you can still feel that sympathy for the guy. It's, that's heartening. On the other hand, like you're saying, it's not warranted. Another side of this, though, is I mean, he's legitimately probably pretty frustrated with these results, but it's probably mixed because this has probably not been a particularly happy period for him. It's probably been kind of stressful. It might feel like he's wasting his time. And he also, on a deeper level, might feel like he sort of got what he came in to get. He became president of the United States. He tried to make a bunch of changes. This is his self-narrative here I'm sort of painting. He tried to make a bunch of changes. He was stymied at every turn by the establishment. And he was this major historical figure, again, in his mind, who tried to stand up against the establishment, successfully stood up against the establishment in a lot of cases, and is now having to step down after getting pushed out by a corrupt system. That's how much truth there is in there. I'll leave it up to the listener to determine for themselves. But as far as I can tell, that's one possible narrative that he might be telling himself, in which ultimately he kind of did, vedi vidi vici. He kind of did come and see it and conquer it in his own little way. So now he might be thinking, okay, well, whatever happens, whatever shall be, que sera, sera. And if he gets out and he goes back into the business world, he was just president. I mean, so just in terms of ego gratification, he might be feeling okay about things. That's maybe a controversial take, considering how hard he and his team are pushing back against this stuff, or at least they were until like, you're talking about the concession here, at least an apparent concession, and an apparent emotional concession too. But yeah, I could see that. I could see that as well. What's your take, Jamarl?
So, do you remember when Obama won in 2012 when he beat Romney? And people thought, on the Republicans, they honestly believed that Romney was going to take that. And Obama, when he talks to the people afterwards, he breaks down crying. No drama Obama breaks down into tears. And he's telling people, thank you. And, I'm so happy that I won it. Because you don't want to be the first black president and it was a fluke, right? And on top of that, the pressure that is on these guys, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people watching, hundreds of millions of people, and you have all of these people that want him to lose. Well, the same thing with Trump, and think of it being magnified with all of these people who hate his guts, who just wish that he couldn't breathe, that if he was, dying and choking to death on poison, that they would stand there and sip their Merlot watching him. Like, it's that level of hatred. And so if you're a president, you don't want those people to succeed. Like, even if you didn't want to be president, you don't want them to prosper. The last thing you want is to see you with your little box walking out the White House with them laughing and pointing. You don't want it. So, whether he wanted to be president in the beginning or not, the fact that he was president, I don't think anybody wanted to take that loss with that number of people who wanted to go after him. So that's my thought. I mean, but I feel you, like you said, in his own self-narrative. And like you said, that narrative could be, let the people evaluate it for themselves. But let's do this. Let's go into the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us now, Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief at Duran.com, and actually one of my favorite guests. I always enjoy talking to him. Alexander, welcome to the show.
And a great pleasure to be on the show, and thanks for the nice words, the good words.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy your show. Your perspective and your commentary on Nagorno-Karabakh, I was enamored by it. No, I really enjoy you coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it. So I want to get into, at least starting off with this election, we were just talking about Donald Trump basically, even though he's not conceding verbally, that his actions and even his demeanor comes across as if he has lost, and on some level is accepting that loss, even if he can't bring himself to say so. What do you think about this? I mean, these guys were bringing up all sorts of stuff, and I got to be honest, he almost undermined himself in the attacks that he was making in order to pursue. Meaning, if you're going to put Rudy Giuliani out there, and you're going to put Sidney Powell out there, and Sidney Powell is going to say that Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia, who's a Trump supporter, is connected with the ghost of Hugo Chavez, with the bad intentions of Nicolas Maduro, with Xi Jinping giving it approval, with the Cuban doctors making sure it's okay, and that all of these people are together in order to take down Trump with the help of the CIA, because socialist countries can't build anything. Like, if you're going to make that argument, it hurts your case, right?
Well, exactly. I think that was the turning point, actually. I mean, I think up to that moment, Donald Trump, I think, persuaded himself that he had some possibility of winning this thing. But I think when Sidney Powell started making these, frankly, deranged claims and was then challenged to come up with evidence for them, and it turned out that he doesn't actually have any evidence for them, and I think even he lost faith in the whole thing and has come to realize that there's no realistic way that he's ever going to win through these legal challenges. So the result is the series of decisions he's been making this week. He's still insisting, as I understand it, up to now, that he's not going to concede, but he's no longer obstructing the Biden transition, which, of course, clearly means that he expects Joe Biden to be formally elected president by the Electoral College next month and be inaugurated president on the 20th of January of next year. So I think in Donald Trump's mind, it is now over. I think he's accepted it. He probably will stop short from ever formally admitting it, because I don't think his vanity and his pride will let him do that. And I think he may also feel that if he does, he may let down his supporters, or at least let down some of his supporters who've been, worked up to think that something was coming. But as I said, I think after Sidney Powell's crazy claims, I don't think even he believes that there's any possible way that this can succeed.
Do you think he actually believed this? Or do you, meaning, was this the people around him? Or do you think this was just politics? Because I gotta be honest, sometimes I can't tell. The president is often insulated.
It's very true. I don't think anybody can tell, but I'm going to make a guess, which is, I think on election night, he probably went to bed, or probably he didn't go to bed, but it did look at one point as if he was well in the lead. And I think that suddenly we were getting reports from certain states. And I think he jumped to the conclusion, as many people did, that something very bad was going on. So when the results started to appear and they seemed to be swinging decisively in Joe Biden's direction, he and many people suspected that something had gone on. Now the problem with that is that, of course, suspecting is one thing, proving is quite something else, and he's never been able to prove it. So I think initially, on the original day itself, on election day, on election night, he probably thought that something was going wrong and something, that he was being cheated of his victory. But I think as the days and weeks since then have passed, his faith that he's ever going to be able to prove that has drained away.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It seems like the harebrained schemes, or the harebrained, the moment that you bring in Brian Kemp, it just sounds ludicrous. Before it sounded ludicrous, Brian Kemp just makes it sound that much more ridiculous. What do you think Democrats are going to learn from this? And this is the part that grates my gears. To take a thing from, I think it was Family Guy. Joe Biden, I didn't want Joe Biden to win this race, but I didn't want Trump to win this race either. I didn't have a dog in the hunt. I was despondent on either. But there's something to be said about the way Biden ran this race, where he offered nothing. There were no expectations from the standpoint of the people who were pushing him. and even lefties and progressives basically bent the knee and bowed their heads. Meaning everybody, Donald Trump was such a unique foil in the eyes of many people that even people who were considered quote unquote radicals bent the knee and went in line to say, you got to vote for Biden, you got to vote for Biden. Now the question becomes, what does this teach the Democratic Party? Meaning a party that was beaten by a reality show host in 2016 wins with a status quo candidate. What does it teach them? And what are we going to expect from a Biden administration based on the people who he's been putting in his cabinet?
Right. I think there's two things that they're going to take away. Firstly, I think they're going to take away the technical thing that mail-in ballots work for them. And I think you will now see the Democrats trying to make that a permanent factor in every election. So I think we will now start to see a shift in the United States towards mail-in ballots being made permanent. That's one thing they will learn. I'm afraid in every other respect, they are the sort of people who remember everything and learn nothing. Because it was, I think, fine to put up Joe Biden against Donald Trump, who is an extraordinarily divisive figure. And by, the Republicans running Donald Trump, you could put, any Democrat up against him, even a centrist Democrat, and that would be enough. You'd get lots of people, tens upon tens of millions of people voting for that Democrat because they don't want Donald Trump as president. But I think the danger of doing that in future is that if you put forward these utterly visionless, centrist figures in a situation where there are growing problems in the United States at more and more levels, then firstly, you're going to face a backlash against you at the next election. So I don't think this is a winning formula going forward. And of course, the risk you run is a centrist president is not going to deal with the underlying problems of the United States, which as a result are going to get worse. And if we come to the shape of the Biden administration, it seems to me that the kind of people Biden is appointing are status quo technicians. They're not even technocrats in any true sense. I mean, they're not kind of people, who you can imagine running some great enterprise, building highways, repairing infrastructure, or anything like that. They're the sort of people who will keep things as they are, ticking over, not making any big changes. They're not going to have any great problems getting confirmed, even by a Republican Senate. They will do all the usual things, tick all the usual boxes. But in terms of the underlying problems of the United States, which are growing greater, they will do nothing, just as Biden won't do very much. At 78, realistically, which is what he's going to be when he's president, at 78, he's not somebody, I think, who's going to have any forward vision anyway for a future presidency, even if he ever had one, which I doubt. And the people he is appointing are people who will not change anything, who are there not to rock the boat in any form.
Yeah, this is a conversation we were having months in advance of the election. Biden, a milquetoast candidate, the institution behind him, maybe a little bit less sleepy, but still deeply sclerotic, deeply stagnant, and deeply set in its ways. And the fact that that's being put back into power it gives me some ill forebodings about the coming years, simply because the degree of the problem that we as Americans face, let alone the world faces, appears to be rising and ratcheting up as the years go by. So that's a problem. I want to actually turn to the Republican Party, or even a little bit more broadly, to any alternative to this. Do you see? I believe that the phrase you put forward was the Republican Party putting forward Trump, or putting Trump forward, or backing Trump, taking control of Trump in some sense. Do you see any chance that the movement that Donald Trump seemed to have sparked, even if we step back for a second and don't consider it purely in terms of his supporters, but in terms of a sort of conversational backlash to the status quo, where there is a recognition that America has deep problems, whether those problems include Donald Trump or include Donald Trump's opponents. That seems to have been in the air in recent years. If we're going back to the status quo, do you think that's going to dissipate? If it persists, what form do you think that's going to take? And what expression do you think that's going to have in our political system? Do you see the rise of other political parties? Do you think the Republican Party is going to be a platform for this? Do you think there's going to be a strong enough insurgency on the left to either take over or reform or at least augment the Democratic Party's trajectory? Where do you see this sort of alternative dissident wing in American politics going during this election and in the next couple of elections? Alexander.
This is absolutely interesting because we've just talked about the Democrats. Let's talk about the Republicans, because, of course, the Republicans have now been handed by Donald Trump with this, large, very large movement of disaffected people who want to see changes in the United States. But, of course, the Republicans are a profoundly conservative party. They never really liked Donald Trump. And if you read what some Republicans are saying, some establishment Republicans are saying, they're actually saying, well, because the Republicans did so well in the House and they did so well in the Senate and they've done so well in the gubernatorial elections and they've done so well in keeping the local houses of representatives, that proves that Donald Trump was somehow a liability in this election and that we are going to benefit as a Republican Party by going back to the same status quo conservative positions that we had before. So in a way, they too are rejecting their own radical, disaffected wing. And I think if they do that, if they put forward another sort of bland, Paul Ryan type figure next time in 2024, they could very well find that an awful lot of that energy and enthusiasm, which Trump has provided on their side. I mean, Trump has energized the Democrats and he's energized the Republicans. But if they go back to the sort of kind of Paul Ryan type candidate, then I think they will find, just as the Democrats may, that people lose interest and we will start to see things actually ebbing away for them too. Now, that does create an opening because, if I may say this,
Alexander, let's actually go into a break. That opening is perhaps best picked up on the other side of this break. That's another interesting conversation. I want to hand it back to you when we come back. For those listening, you're listening to the voice of Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief at theduran.com, which you should check out, theduran.com. Also go over to Twitter, the Duran_com over on Twitter. The Duran, again, great platform based in the UK, but also covering news and events around the world. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we will be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out,
we actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest Mercouris, Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief at theduran.com. Go check that out. Alexander, as we were going into the break, you were talking about both the Democrats first and then the Republicans second, closing down, sort of closing their ranks, accepting their own internal status quos, and moving forward, that this actually might create an opening. And you were about to get into the opening, and I cut you off. An opening for what? What do you see politically the response being to this, Alexander?
Well, I'm going to say, I think one of the paradoxes of the Trump phenomenon is that obviously Trump himself is very right-wing and the Republican Party is very right-wing. But many of his sort of tropes, if you like, re-industrializing the US, building infrastructure, not saying whether or not he meant any of those things, bringing the troops home. Again, I'm not saying he meant any of those things, but those sort of tropes lie more naturally on the left than they do on the right. And that, I think, is why the Republican Party, the leadership of the Republican Party, has had so much trouble with Trump, and why, if you like, they seem to be now moving towards spitting him out. But the very success of Trump shows what powerful traction within the US many of these themes and ideas actually have. Now, if you think about it, that does mean that there is a genuine possible opening for a real populist of the left. It has to be of the left because, as I said, these are left-wing tropes, ultimately, to come forward. The great problem with the US is that with the extraordinary lock the two parties and the establishments of the two parties have, the Democrats and the Republicans, it's not clear to me whether that opening can result in a genuine movement and how that would be organized. But it is there. And I think this is a point which people who are on the sort of Bernie Sanders wing of the Democrat Party might want to consider. Ultimately, what they do in elections is they mobilize all these left-wing people and then hand them over to an establishment Democrat. If they finally make the leap and break away and run by themselves, then I think we could start to see real change in this very stagnant political system that we have in the United States, which Trump has not been able to change or shatter in any real sense. But really does need change.
I agree with you. But I don't know if it can be done in a party. Because it seems like in this country, the moment that you're in one party, you're alienated by people who are in the other. Meaning, the moment that you say you're a Democrat, then immediately the people who are in the other tribe have all of these ideas and everything else that are associated with that tribe and hate you right off the bat. Like, it's very bizarre. I think the way to do it, though, is to eschew party and push under policy. Because you may have a situation where somebody hates Democrats, but just because you're a Republican doesn't necessarily mean you don't want your mom, your cousin, your sister to go without health care. You know what I mean? Like, the position or the condition that you are in from the standpoint of your environment may give you certain ideas on very specific things, even though the entirety of the whole may not be something that you want. So you wouldn't push for a Democrat, even though you would back Medicare for all. And I'm thinking that maybe that's the way to thread that needle. What do you think about that? Because I agree with you that there seems to be an opening. I agree with you that the policies that Trump was pushing, I mean, Trump was calling for an increase in the minimum wage. He was calling for a removal or pulling out of those wars. And the Republicans backed him on that. Like, this wasn't stuff that they didn't know. This was stuff that he was saying, and this was stuff that they agreed with. And like you said, these things fit more comfortably on the left, even though they were perfectly willing to back him on the right, pushing those policies. So how do you think that needle needs to be threaded? Because, you see it for yourself in the UK, where you have these kind of two-party systems and so forth. I think the politics are a little bit more fluid in the UK. But how do you thread the needle here?
It's extraordinarily difficult because of, as I said, this extraordinary lock that the two parties in the US have over the political system there. And you're absolutely right. Partisanship, which again, in a way, the Trump phenomenon has sharpened, makes it more difficult. All I will say is this. I think the future of the US depends on the break of the system. And clearly there has to be some way of trying to mobilize people, and it probably has to be organized from the grassroots up rather than from the top down. I mean, Bernie Sanders coming along and saying, I am, the person who's going to lead you to the promised land, and I'm going to do it either through the Democrat Party or, if you're some sort of populist Republican, through the Republican Party. That clearly doesn't work. So you have to organize at the grassroots. The problem is what we know from US history is that is incredibly difficult, and you're up against huge problems if you try to do it. But if you don't do it, if that doesn't happen, then the risk the US runs is of stagnation. It's already beginning to look rather Brezhnevist, if I can use that expression, with always the people who ultimately win out being the people who want to keep things as they are, even as the underlying problems continue to accumulate and grow. And the risk you run there is that all the problems then suddenly come together at once, and you get a crisis of a kind that you can't really cope with in any way through the political system that has existed up to then. So that can be quite a sudden shock to the system. And if you want a more progressive evolutionary change over time, you have to find ways to battle through the system the political system as it exists now, and hope that the pressures it imposes on you are not too great to make that impossible. I think it can be done, but it needs both a very inspiring leader, and it also needs some very, very strong organizers at the grassroots. I suspect the latter exists at the moment. It's the former that is lacking.
And I can't help but completely agree. I completely agree with pretty much every different side of that analysis. You have right now a stagnant, sclerotic class of rent-seeking political and economic elites, and what you need is somebody to shape that system up and replace it with some other order. But again, it's a specific figure, a specific person, and I do not know what their exact political leanings would look like. I think that's a lot of the work, actually, is just that person having coherent enough sort of statesperson-like politics where they can bring these divergent groups together and navigate that crisis. And that will be a crisis. It will be a kind of political apocalypse, as far as I can tell. What do you think, looking at this from a sort of deeper, almost a philosophical level, perhaps, Alexander, what do you think that crisis will look and feel like from the inside?
It will be very, if we don't get a solution, and I'm not predicting a crisis like that tomorrow, but, talk 10 years, talk 15 years, we might be looking at a different thing. I think, firstly, there will be a major economic crisis, but I think we will also start to see major disturbances, political takeovers in cities, challenges to the government. It's difficult always to imagine these things before they happened. If you'd lived in France in 1780, or you'd lived in Russia in 1900, very difficult to imagine what would happen, with the revolutions that came in both of those countries and how they would play themselves out. But I think we would be looking at an event on a comparable scale, hopefully a much less violent one, but, a massively disturbed situation with a sudden crisis in the economy, a sudden crisis in the financial system, a major retrenchment in the military, because the United States cannot afford this enormous bloated military system that it has, which costs far more, I think, than most people in the United States realize. And then, as I said, you would suddenly see a kind of Soviet-style implosion in American power and in the American system. Now, I think the time and the space exists to turn that round. But again, in order to do that, you have to, as I said, shake or break the stranglehold that the rentiers, as you put it, have over the political system that exists now. The danger is that they will continue to resist it, and as I said, we will get into that kind of crisis. Picturing the crisis is difficult. All you can say is that sooner or later, if change doesn't come through the political system, then change will come from outside the political system, and it could be extremely disturbing.
Yeah, at some point, the amount of stress that's on the population is going to create an incentive for that population to do something. And it's like the energy in doing something is less than energy in not. Like that's when you get this kind of, this inversion where the population moves. I want to make a hard pivot for the moment. We only have about 2 minutes left to the UK and Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is a sad figure on many levels, a tragic figure even. I mean, he runs and does what he can in order to try to push that country into a better spot, meaning from the standpoint of the left. He gets close. His own party works against him. He doesn't push back against his own party. He gets hobbled into this position where he loses. And on top of losing, then gets expelled from the party by being called an anti-Semite, where I don't believe for a moment that Jeremy Corbyn has one anti-Semitic bone in his body. Anti-Zionist, yes, but those are different things. Is that going to split the Labour Party for good?
It's looking increasingly likely that may very well happen. I mean, one of the problems is that we now have a purge, which I think is now running out of control. The chief whip, who is the parliamentary manager of the Labour Party, has written an unbelievably aggressive letter to Corbyn, calling him to apologise for understating the seriousness of anti-Semitism, which of course Corbyn has never done. And that has really upset many, many people in the party. They are two different parties now, and they are in deep conflict with each other. And I wonder how long this can continue for.
It's similar here. The left, a Democratic Party, and Progressive, they're two different parties. And it's like this pretending as if these guys are in the same boat. They're not. Alexander, thank you for coming on, man. I always appreciate it. Alexander Mercouris is editor-in-chief at Duran. You can check out the Duran at theduran.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at @theduran_com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has updated its guidelines to recommend that Americans looking to travel abroad take a total of 3 COVID tests before and after their flights. Wow. At least 30 gyms and fitness studios in Philadelphia are demanding that the city allows them to stay open in order to keep their businesses alive during the coronavirus pandemic. They created a group called Philadelphia Fitness Coalition, which on Sunday launched an appeal to officials regarding the recent shutdowns and new restrictions in the city. The coalition gathered outside the city hall on Tuesday, asking for a meeting with the mayor, Jim Kennedy. Shane, what do you think about this? Now, this is, whether you're talking about the fitness centers, whether you're talking about restaurants, whether you're talking, you can pretty much pick any business that is enclosed and that has people in it. Massage parlors, for example. Should those businesses be able to stay open if the customers of those businesses accept that they can get ill? And honestly, is it enough of a reason, profit, to keep those businesses open if these guys can end up spreading a disease around the city?
I mean, here's the other side of this. You're looking at this as in terms of profit in an abstract sense, but a lot of these businesses are small businesses, and in which case you have like one or two or a handful of people who've invested like years or decades or potentially multiple generations of lives.
Wait, just to be clear, I'm not saying that all of these guys are rich. I'm just saying they want to make profit. I mean, they want to live. I mean, whether that's 50,000 or 100,000 a year, I'm just saying they want to keep their businesses open so they can. Okay, fair enough. Me saying profit makes it sound like these guys are making buku bucks. Fair enough. But I just mean
that's part of it, and
they want to run their business.
Profit is abstract. It's easy to criticize capitalism, but if we lived in a feudal society where like you had guilds and these were run by people maintaining guilds and they needed to keep people coming in. So, the metaphor sort of starts to break down here. But I mean, you can have money in a non-capitalist society. If they want to keep their things going and the higher ups are asking them to shut down because of a plague, granted, it does sound like they should shut down because there's a plague going around. But I mean, there's the other side of this, which is there are a lot of people. I mean, what a figure I saw the other day, 50% of businesses that have closed down on Yelp are shuttering permanently. They're closing down permanently. That's on an individual scale. How many tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, which these people, and a lot of them had to work for like years or decades of their lives to save up. And like, this is their dream. This is their livelihood. This is what they have their kids' futures pinned on. It's easy to like look at that either abstractly or to think about it in terms of one family. And you get sort of either fixated on either an abstract grand level or on a too individualistic a level. But we have tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who are facing these kinds of choices. So I don't want to, I'm not saying that should decide it. That sort of emotional consciousness of what's going on shouldn't decide it, but that, sits in one of the columns of the pros and the cons of shutting this stuff down.
Yeah, reality gives us no easy outs. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about. Because it's not just the business owner. You have people who work at those businesses, right? If you have like a restaurant, the business owner might be making, I don't know, let's say $100,000 a year, which depending on where you live is not a huge amount. And they have employees that work there. Those employees use that to pay for their livelihoods. And so I'm not minimizing it. And maybe using the term profit makes it seem like Bill Gates. I just mean that there's this interplay between the ability or the need for people to be able to feed themselves, whether that's in a small business, whether that's working as a waiter, whether that's working as a bartender, whether that's working as a masseuse. And this secondary pressure of the government saying, we need you to shut down because we don't want to create a situation where you're spreading this to others. And it's like, there's no easy out for that. Outside of the government saying, if we're shutting you down, then we should pay for the fact that we're shutting you down. That's the only out I see for that. Like, unless there's some other option that I don't necessarily see. It seems like you can't keep the business open for obvious reasons. And on top of not being able to keep the business open, you have people who need to pay for their food, shelter, home, etc. How does that get paid for? That's the question.
You don't. Yeah, no, I mean, the easy out is a time machine. And you use that and you go back and you stockpile more masks. And then you get like baby Hitler into some sort of rehabilitative. You get him into an art school.
Baby Hitler?
All the way through art. I said baby Hitler. You take baby Hitler all the way through art school. He ends up happy. No, I'm kidding. That's morbid, of course. But no, there is no easy out. The easy out is magic. At this point, it's all hard choices. That's reality.
It's like the further down you get in a decision space, your decision space narrows. Like the farther down you get, especially when there's a bad choice. It's like you have a narrow decision space because it's a bad choice, and it gets narrow and narrow until you end up with just bad outcomes. Now, my heart goes out to these guys. I wasn't saying it in this kind of undermining way. Like it was purely a capitalist incentive. I look at this as these people need to pay for their livelihoods, and the people who work for them needs to pay for their livelihoods. But that's fair. Saying profit gives it a very specific connotation, so that's fair. That's fair. El Paso County, Texas, has ordered a new curfew starting Thanksgiving Eve as it continues to grapple with the rise in COVID-19 cases and so many deaths that 10 additional morgue units have been bought to accommodate the surge. The situation is so dire that 1,500 additional medical professionals and the National Guard have been deployed to help. Even inmates have been enlisted to assist in morgue operations as the death toll grows. The curfew took effect at 12:01 a.m. Wednesday and will run from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. until November 30th. El Paso Judge Ricardo Seminego announced on Tuesday afternoon at the afternoon news conference. New Mexico lawmakers on Tuesday passed a bipartisan coronavirus relief bill that would deliver a one-time $1,200 check to all types of unemployed workers and up to $50,000 for uncertain businesses. The bill also provides smaller stimulus checks for immigrants without legal status in the country and dependents, as well as additional funds for food banks, virus testing, and contact tracing efforts. Arizona Republican Party chairwoman Kelly Ward filed the lawsuit Tuesday seeking an inspection of both mail-in ballot signatures and duplicated ballots in Metro Phoenix, alleging election officials didn't give legal observers enough access to ballot processing. The lawsuit filed against President-elects Joe Biden 11 electors in Arizona also alleged some suburbs on the southeastern edge of Maricopa County had unusually high numbers of duplicated ballots, and that the election results in that area were, quote, strongly inconsistent, unquote, with voter registration and historical voting data. Ballots are duplicated when they are damaged or too illegible to run through a tabulator. The lawsuit alleged that software used in the processing such electronic ballots was inaccurate and would pre-fill Biden's name on ballots more often than it did President Donald Trump. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin plans to sign a new city budget that includes an 18% cut to the city's police department funding, according to a statement issued by her office Tuesday. A vote by the Seattle City Council approved the budget Monday by 8-1, with council member Shama Shawant voting against. She had pushed for the full 50% cut to the police budget that protesters had demanded over the summer following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Love that woman. Love her. I'm looking at this vote saying 8-1, and I thought to myself, who was the person that voted against that? She voted against it. Why? Because it wasn't sufficient. It wasn't the 50% that she wanted. It was only 18%. Irrepressible. Irrepressible. Love that woman. Shama Shawant is the socialist member on the Seattle Council, and she has been a force of nature on that board. So shout out to her. Love that woman. Prospective tourists and visitors from more than 20 countries, mostly in Africa, could pay as much as $15,000 bond to obtain a U.S. visa under a new rule from the Trump administration. The requirements unveiled on Tuesday, the State Department said, are designed to send a message to certain nations to encourage their citizens to abide by the conditions of their U.S. visas. The State Department said it selected countries whose citizens have higher rates of remaining in the United States after the visas have expired. Under the 6-month pilot program starting December 24th, United States consular offices could start requiring applicants for B1 and B2 visas who hail from selected countries to pay $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 bond. Wow. On Tuesday, Scotland became the first country to make menstrual products free in public facilities nationwide. The Scottish Parliament confirmed in a tweet on Tuesday that the bill had passed unanimously. According to the Parliament's website, the law requires the Scottish government to set up a universal system so that anyone who needs in need of period products can get them free. Schools, colleges, and universities will also be required to make free menstrual products available in restrooms. Local authorities and education providers will be responsible for ensuring free products made available under the law. Love that. You have no idea how much I love that. What is the point of a collective group of people, meaning government, if it's not to attend to the needs of the population itself? And if you can make the argument for menstrual products, you can basically make the argument for pretty much anything that a society may need desperately and that some people may go without. Shane, one of the arguments that Republicans would make about people saying healthcare is a human right, they would say, well, how is it a human right if you require it from somebody else? Meaning, if you require a doctor to provide that health care, how can you say it's a human right if you can't basically do it for yourself? Well, government and the collective, it's not that it's a God-given as a flat fact right. Rights are given by law. They're not endowed by a creator. I know people like to think that, but in all things being equal, unless you can protect it, you can't hold on to it. We have a collective, and we come together and say, this is what we deem necessary. Now, we may fail at that. Don't misunderstand me. And your environment have to be consistent or sufficient enough to be able to supply that demand or supply that thing that you say is required. But let's be very clear. It can be done. And in the very case of Parliament where they're saying, look, we're going to make it our mandate, that this is what we're going to provide to the various people in our society, we can do the same thing with healthcare or pretty much anything else. What do you think about this? Do you think it's a good idea, a bad idea? Do you think this allows a slippery slope to other things? I mean, they already have universal health care in the UK, so there can't be a slippery slope to that. But what do you think about it in general, especially in the context of here in the US?
I mean, I did. So one level, I'm gonna completely step back. In its own way, ideally, this helps the male gender to understand the female gender. If you want to split it up into two genders and just that, and ideally, like there's historically this weird sort of deprivation of knowledge and sensitivity that men have towards what's going on in women's bodies, and so ideally, like this is an opportunity for men to learn more and yeah, that's one sort of close-up side of things. Broadly, I hear your slippery slope argument, and I could raise you some other argument, but I don't know, man. I don't know how this stuff is going to go. I'm just gonna be the sort of naive, not necessarily uninformed, but I don't know. I could see this going all sorts of different ways, and I could argue this in practically any direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like. I think that's fair. I mean, personally, I like it because I don't like people being deprived of things that they need. And it's something like that in the United States. I mean, they have universal health care there. So, you can almost make an argument that this is an issue of health, in which case it fits under it. We don't have that here in the States. If we did have health care, then maybe this will just come along with it. Also,
I could argue with you, and maybe that'd be interesting, but I'm feeling a little bit kumbaya this morning. So maybe I just want people to get along.
Well, as for men learning more about women's bodies, you're right. I made it my business to learn as much as I could about the woman's body. I'm an expert.
Is that right, Jamarl?
I did. I am. Yeah, I am. Yes, I have. Yes, I have, Shane. Yes, I have. I have studied it extensively. Indonesia's anti-corrupt commission said it arrested. I'm imagining my wife is going to have some issues with that. She's going to be like, "You did, huh?" So I'll stop that there. Indonesia's anti-corruption commission said it arrested the country's fisheries minister on Wednesday amid an investigation into exports of lobster larvae. Maritime Affairs and Fisheries Minister Ade Prabowo was arrested upon arrival at Jakarta's Soekarno-Hatta International Airport from a working visit to the United States. The deputy chairman of the Corruption Eradication Commission, Nurul Gufron, told Compass TV, quote, "The arrest is related to lobster seed exports," unquote, without elaborating on comments aired on the station. He said the investigators were still questioning Prabowo, and another announcement will be made later on Wednesday. Prabowo earlier this year rolled back a ban on lobster larvae exports put in place by his predecessor. That decision sparked criticism from his predecessor and activists over sustainability concerns. Let's do this. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's do this. Let's go into a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment. Keep in mind, guys, we're not going to be here on Thursday and Friday. So take us all in now. We'll be back shortly.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our guest, Andrew Spannous, American journalist and writer in Italy. You can follow Andrew, by the way, on Twitter at Andrew Spannous. That is Spannnaus. You can also check out his website, transatlantico.info. Andrew, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
My pleasure. Good morning to everyone. I'm doing okay over here. We're in lockdown in northern Italy, partial lockdown, almost not quite as bad as last time in the spring, but close. Most things are closed in my area. Stores that are non-essential are closed, and the big debate is what to do for Christmas, which is coming up.
Oh yeah, and just out of curiosity, how about you? You're planning on hanging out at home, or what is the plan both for you and I suppose generally nationally? What's it looking like for the country there?
Well, Italy is a country which was the country that was hit first, right, in Europe, and in the West in general. And things got really bad in April, May, as it spread to other countries too. But here, there was a city named Bergamo, which is, I think, the hardest hit place in the whole Western world in terms of percentage at the beginning. But Italy locked down. We locked down for 2 months, over 2 months, which meant more lockdown than you saw even in New York City. It means you're not even supposed to go. You weren't supposed to even go out of your house or out of your yard if you had one. I'm fortunate to have one. And they got it down to 100, 200 new cases a day by the end of the summer, and things basically reopened almost completely. And suddenly it got worse again in the fall. So you've gotten up to 35,000 cases a day, which would in the U.S. mean over 200,000 cases a day. And the number of deaths here is also higher percentage-wise than it is in the U.S. So now they went back down to a lockdown for parts of the country, dividing it into red zones, orange zones, and yellow zones. We're in the red zone. Schools, the one thing they've done is they've kept elementary and middle schools open. High schools are closed. Stores, people go to work now, unlike in the first lockdown, when a lot of businesses were closed, 50 to 60%. Now people still go to work, and the numbers are starting to come down now, just starting to come down. So they'll probably be down in another 2 to 3 weeks down to a more manageable level, but the government is not ready. And what's been proven is even getting the numbers down doesn't mean you're ready to deal with the situation if it gets worse again. So they're very worried. The government's very worried and trying to convince everyone that it's necessary to still have rules against having more than 5 people, 6 people in your house, keep the restaurants closed in the evening and stuff like this.
Andrew, I'm fascinated by the various countries and the way that they try to handle this. One of the ideas behind states is that they're little laboratories that you can have, see what they do in each state, and maybe you can emulate it. Well, with this, oddly enough, it's almost became a world thing because the entire world is to some degree dealing with it. And like you say, Italy was one of those countries that was hardest hit. From a political standpoint, how did Italy handle that? And I'm asking this question in 2 ways. One, from an economic standpoint, because of the costs of either paying for the people when they weren't able to work, when you guys don't have sovereign currency. I mean, you guys use EU, the euro, which means that, you guys don't have they don't have the capacity to basically pay and increase their budgets in a way, let's say, like the United States or the UK can. But also politically, from the standpoint of the government itself and the rules that it was making, and if there was pushback to those rules.
All right, 2 great questions. I'll take the political side first. Political side is very different than in the United States. Here, the decisions have been made at the national level by the prime minister by what are called prime minister's decrees. That it's like an executive order, but in the U.S., an executive order telling everyone that they can't go outside or they have to wear a mask would be challenged immediately and probably fail, get thrown out in court. Here, it's not challenged at all. There's complaints by the opposition and in local, maybe governors of the single regions here. Region is like a state in the U.S. But the government has the power to do it. They just put out these orders, and they've done them over and over again. So the prime minister's office just gets together with the parties in power, and they write the rules. And at the beginning, they were barely even talking to the other political parties. It was not a very democratic very democratic process at all. Very different than in the U.S. What they would say here is, well, it mostly worked at the beginning. What kind of opposition was there? Well, at the beginning there was little opposition. I mean, there were people at the beginning saying, well, it's not a real virus, it's not a real problem, but that went away pretty quickly when you saw lines of military trucks taking coffins out of the hospitals in some northern cities here. What happened in the early fall, September, October, is that when they started putting restrictions back on in October, there were some street demonstrations. But overall, the numbers got to a point where people recognized that they basically have to listen to what the government says, although there's a political debate on it. The economic side is very interesting. Italy, as you said, like other European countries, does not have a sovereign currency. So that's a huge issue. Italy needed money, and the way it's set up here, the social welfare state is much more extensive in the United States than in the United States. So most people, there's a lot more people who have a full-time job who can't get fired, basically. Right? So most people who have a full-time job just kept their job but stopped working for a while, but kept getting paid. And so that was easy to do in that sense. The people who are self-employed, and there's a certain number of that, it's not as high as in the U.S., but have more insecure jobs, got very little money. They got 600 euros a month. That's $650 a month, and some of them only got it twice. So that was less than what happened in the U.S. And the big worry here is, it's public debt. Now, the government basically just started spending money, but the whole fight, and this is something we should talk about, the whole fight is about the European Union, what they call the recovery fund or the next generation. And it's, in my view, a big bluff about how the EU's talking about spending all this new money, because basically they're not. They haven't abandoned the mentality that you can't spend money, you running up a deficit and a debt. They are spending money, but they're doing their best not to change the mentality. Whereas in the U.S., although the Republicans now, started to try to slow it down, huge amounts of money were spent in the first 2-3 months of the crisis, 15% of GDP, plus the Fed, and all that money, no one needs to pay it back. The central banks just create that money electronically. No one has to pay it back. And frankly, it was needed. It's needed for the economy. It's needed here too. And they just need to get over the fact that you have to spend money when you're in an emergency.
That's austerity policies you're talking about. And what's the controversy there? You said we should get into it. What's the conversation like in Italy and in Europe, Andrew?
So the austerity, this is the idea. What's been happening in Europe over the past 10 years, and this comes from the Maastricht Treaty, 1992, which went into effect in 93, when the European Union was created, and they decided to go towards the euro, the common currency. To go to a common currency, they set up rules, and those rules say you can't have more than a certain level of budget deficit, of debt, and inflation. And any country that is a little bit beyond these parameters, or even if they're just close, then the European Commission, which is the central governing body, not elected directly at all, they come in and they tell you what you got to do. They tell you got to cut your budget. So it's austerity, and the easiest thing to cut always is broad-based basic services, healthcare, investment, infrastructure, any kind of social spending. That's where you find the money, and that's what they do. Just like in the U.S., when you hear people who really want to cut the budget, they say, hey, let's go after Social Security and Medicare, right? So Italy is one of the countries that suffered significantly from this kind of austerity, these kind of budget cuts. And so now they've said, well, we've got to spend money. We can't do it on our own. We have to do it at the European level. So they come up with this thing called the Recovery Fund, which is supposed to be $750 billion euros, which is still significantly less even than what's been done in the U.S. Although again, the social welfare state here is more widespread, so you're able to deal with problems a little bit more quickly at that level. But they've been fighting over it for months, and they still haven't approved anything. So the Italians are here waiting, saying, "Oh, we're going to get 200 billion euros from the European Union, which is going to help us survive." They haven't gotten a single thing. If they get it, they're supposed to get it over time, over the next 3 years. And the reality is they'll have to pay most of it back. So it's actually ridiculous because they're not doing what they need to do immediately, and the economy is suffering, and economic suffering here is going to be, it's going to be longer in a lot of countries because of this mentality, because they have not gotten over the idea that you have to really spend tons of money and not worry about the fact that you're doing it, that you're creating debt to do this. Because if your central bank is working properly, which the European Central Bank is not, although it's done it partially, if it's working properly, then it's just creating an internal circle where the bank issues money and the government spend it, and they're covering a hole which is that people aren't earning enough money and businesses are losing out. So that's the fight going on here, but it's going to be hard to break this mentality, because this mentality is it's the cement of the European Union. It's what holds the European Union together, is an austerity, free market mentality, which says that national governments cannot make sovereign decisions. And that's what's in play right now.
Yeah, and unelected, by the way. Unelected body. I mean, the European Parliament doesn't get the opportunity to make those laws. And, they can just say yay or nay. And even that is not necessarily a given. Look, the last time I was checking into Italian politics, it was the Five Star Movement, and I forget another group that joined that basically won power. And these guys were Eurosceptics. And there was a fight between the government and the EU, because the government wanted to spend more money than what the European Union guidelines allowed, meaning they want to run a larger deficit. And there was this kind of push back and forth. Do you think with everything that's going on now with COVID and with the difficulties that the various governments are getting, and let's do this. We're going to take a break because we're coming up to the end of the time period. Oh, yeah, we're coming up to the end of the time period. But I wanted to know whether or not this was going to be destabilizing to the European Union. We only have like 30 seconds, so that's not a great amount of time. But do you think COVID and everything that's going on is going to destabilize the various countries in the European Union?
I think that it has pushed the European Union to try to do something, to try to take a step forward. And if the European Union were to actually make this type of change, that is to work together to do the kind of things that people need right now, that would be a positive step forward for the EU, whether you like it or not. But I don't think they're going to succeed in doing it. And in the long run, it's going to produce more opposition to the EU over time. It'll take a while, but that's probably going to happen because they're going to fail. They can't get out of their system.
Basically destabilizing influence if they don't tend to their affairs. American journalist and writer in Italy, Andrew Spannous, that has been the voice that you've been listening to. You can follow Andrew Spannous on Twitter at Andrew Spannus and read his website transatlantic.info. Of course, this is Fault Lines. You guys are listening to Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a quick moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our guest for this segment and the next, Maram Susli. She is a political commentator, geopolitical analyst, and a chemist. And you can follow her on Facebook and Twitter at Partisan Girl. Find her on YouTube by searching for Syrian Girl Partisan and support her on Patreon. at patreon.com/SyrianGirl. Maram, thank you for being with us. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Nice to hear from you guys, and thank you for the introduction.
Thank you for joining us. It's been a little while. Appreciate you coming back. All right. Talking about a bunch of stuff here. A bunch of stuff has happened since we last had you, but let's just start with this. The Trump administration reportedly trying to pull back troops as fits his promise earlier in the year. Originally, he said he wanted a complete withdrawal by Christmas. That does not seem set to happen. Right now, they're saying they're going to draw it down by half, approximately reducing the number of troops in Afghanistan by half. Over on Twitter, I saw you saying that this is not ending the war. In other words, he's pulling troops back, but that's not going to put an end to things. And then, of course, what I'm leaving out of the conversation so far here is Biden, who seems to be set to take office pretty soon, who will, as far as I can tell, all signs show he will push for more war. He'll probably put troops back in office. The people he's putting in the, Blinken, Secretary of State, a number of officials in his cabinet, including his national security advisors, all seem pretty war hawkish in a sort of neoliberal, neocon, Hillary Clinton State Department vein. What do you see happening here, Maram?
Well, I think that Trump has revealed himself to be weak. He acts strong, but when it comes to the crunch, he just can't seem to fulfill the promises that he's made or even stand up for himself. I mean, it's interesting that his, Ambassador Jim Jeffrey admitted that he hid troop numbers from Trump in Syria. Like, he admitted to lying to the president, which, this man, the president, has a decision whether or not to use nuclear bombs, and you're giving him false information. I mean, isn't that some kind of a treason? It boggles the mind that he can say it as if he's proud about it, that he lied to the man who's been elected by the American people. And I think that Trump has tried, perhaps, to pull troops out. He did at one point say he wanted them out, and then Lindsey Graham stepped in and insisted he leave some near the oil fields. So he hasn't managed to do it. And I think in Afghanistan and Iraq, like they want to cut down troop numbers by half. But what does that really mean? I mean, again, they admitted to lying to him about how many people are on the ground. So they can just put them back in. I mean, it's like Syria. A revolving door.
Yeah, to be clear, it was in Syria, an issue, of course, very close to your heart. I think this was the U.S.'s ambassador to Syria, sort of bragging about how the establishment had lied to Trump. I think they told Trump they had 300 troops in Syria when the reality was they had closer to like 700, something like that. It's been a couple of weeks since I read through the article, so the numbers aren't exact there. But who knows? I hear what you're saying.
Who knows? I've heard it was in the thousands. At the end of the day, they're not just lying to America's president, they're lying to America's people. So what does it mean to draw the troops down by half? Like, tomorrow they're going to be lying about the numbers again. It's meaningless, really. You're either out or you're in, and he's still in. So I don't see any difference. But when it comes to Biden, I do think he's going to be more hawkish. I mean, it's already in his rhetoric. For example, Biden says, he's already talking about how Obama failed in Syria, which means that he failed to overthrow Assad. Basically, that's what it means. So he wants to solve Obama's failure. And one of the things that Biden said is that he's going to be the most pro-Kurdish president that's ever been, which means he's going to seek balkanization of Syria to create a Kurdistan in the east of Syria, east of the Euphrates River, where Kurds are not even in a majority. They're a plurality, not a majority. So, and of course, all of Syria's oil and wheat fields are in that region, and they want to cut it off and give it to essentially like the quote unquote Kurds, which in total are 1.5 million in Syria, but in that region are maybe less than 1 million. So they want to give control of all of Syria's resources that are meant to be for 22 million people and just give it to 1 million of a certain ethnicity. And that's their idea of helping.
You know, what's wild about this?
That's going to be sold to Americans as a heroic deed.
Yeah. And they lie to us all the time, by the way. I mean, the Afghanistan war has been going on for, 18 to 20 years. And during that time, they've lied to the American public from day one. I mean, the activities, the things that they were doing in that country were failing left and right. There's this awesome scene. And this comes from the Afghanistan files that came out in the Washington Post, I believe, where Leon Panetta nearly gets killed by a suicide bomber, comes out and tells everybody things are moving along great. Like, the show the ridiculousness and the level and the extent to which these guys were actually lying about progress in that region of the world. I guess my point is, we have no idea. Like, the number of black sites, the black projects, these things that are even black to members of Congress. So when it gets to the point of the American public, we are at the far end of that. And the information that we get oftentimes can be leaked data in order to attack somebody else, which doesn't give you the entire context of it. And yeah, I agree with you. Lying to the President of the United States is rather profound and should be off the table if we're talking about this is the guy that's supposed to be making military decisions and the guy who chooses whether or not we even use a nuclear bomb. How are you lying to that guy? What's interesting to me about the Biden issue has to do with you had all of these lefties who were backing Biden. Now, when Obama was in office, Obama got 500,000 people killed in Syria based on what he was doing, meaning his military policies. You had situations where terrorists backed by the CIA were fighting terrorists backed by the military. And this was under Obama. Like, this was the weird situation that he was creating in Syria that got all of those people killed. And Joe Biden is now coming in. And like you said, this is not going to be a better situation, especially the people who he's putting in that office. What do you expect from a Biden administration in this area of the world? I mean, Clinton was talking about putting in, missile defense systems and whatnot. So what do you think Biden is going to do in Syria?
I think when it comes to the left, quote unquote, which really essentially we mean neoliberals, they only become left-wing or anti-racist within the boundaries of their own borders. I mean, racism is not allowed within the United States, but they're far and away okay with destroying countries and peoples somewhere else. And I think that's the real hypocrisy of the liberal. You know, they're racist liberals, as they say. So no doubt that they would be cheering for Biden. And it's interesting, you know, now Biden is tweeting, America is back, or the USA is back. And, you know, you have all these liberals cheering that. But what does that mean for the rest of the world? It comes off as a threat. So, you know, it is a hypocrisy. It is really, really disgusting to see. And I think that his policies are just going to be a return of the Obama and Clinton administration and a prolonging of the suffering of the Syrian people. I mean, not to say that Trump was actually doing much better, because, of course, the occupation of Syria continued under Trump. But at least he didn't have the rhetoric of it. He didn't push it as hard in the media. You know, now we're going to probably hear about the Kurds for the next 4 years, since if Biden does get in, which it seems like, unfortunately, he will. And nobody's going to really look at it in a deep way. And, you know, Trump had a stake in it as well, because the YPG or the PKK, the SDF, all the acronyms related to the anarcho-Marxist groups that are Kurdish that the U.S. is arming, they have links to Antifa through their shared ideology by Mari Bookchin and his I forget, he wrote a book, but they all follow that book. So there are lots of Antifa people coming to Syria to fight alongside the Kurds. And of course, Trump has had his run-ins with Antifa. So he had like a stake in not trying to balkanize Syria because of Antifa. It's a strength. It was a thin, connection, but it was definitely there. But Biden has no such limitation And I think that we're going to see a much more hawkish administration. I mean, let's face facts. Like, even now, one of the last things that Trump did was try to send a delegation to negotiate with Assad. And in spite of all of his flaws, including declaring that he's going to steal Syrian oil, at least he was honest about it. He didn't try to paint it as some kind of a humanitarian mission of saving these poor people, and that's going to be the most disgusting part of all, having to hear that these people are going to save us.
Maram, what did you think about this? What did you think about this meeting that was alleged to have taken place between Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's crown prince, and Pompeo over the weekend? I believe this was supposed to have taken place on either Saturday or Sunday. What do you think the purpose of that was, Maram?
I think the purpose of it was Pompeo was begging them to still support Trump because they both came out and congratulated Biden, which is, I find it extremely humorous. Like, what a backstab. The idea was that Trump gave these men basically everything they would ask for. And that's the problem. He gave them everything, so they don't need him anymore. If he had just held back a bit, maybe they would have retained some loyalty, but there's no honor amongst thieves. And they just, declared Biden, congratulated Biden. Even Russia didn't do that. They just said, we'll wait till you figure out who's winning through your legal process before we congratulate anyone. But, Netanyahu turned his back straight away. And we know that Netanyahu and Trump were very lock and step because Netanyahu basically controlled Trump through Jared Kushner. Netanyahu used to sleep in his bed.
Yes, yeah, Kushner once lent Netanyahu his bed, exactly. That's exactly that connection. That's about as intimate, not technically as intimate as you can get, but that's a weirdly close connection. And you're exactly right, Maram.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah.
That's so
bizarre. You can look this up very easily.
There to beg for support, I think.
That's, what? I would say that's better than the alternative. A lot of people were worried that Pompeo was pushing for an early war on Iran before Trump left the presidency, something like that. We were talking about the different ways that could go. I'll be honest, that is pitiful. His offer.
Maybe he was like, well, we'll give you a war with Iran if you just let him be president for the next 4 years. Because at the end of the day, I'm sorry to say, but the Zionist lobby has a lot of influence in the United States. So, they want to get Sheldon Adelson on board. They want to get Netanyahu on board. And maybe a war with Iran was that offer on the table.
And with Pompeo visiting the Golan Heights recently, again, which Trump officially recognized as part of Israel, of course, just mentioned Sheldon Adelson. I believe, last I checked, he was on the board for Genie Energy, the company that had the exclusive drilling rights to the oil under the Golan Heights, which is, again, an Israeli-occupied region of Syria. In any event, Maram, we're hitting a break here. We've got to go into a break. We are joined by Maram Susli, political commentator and geopolitical analyst. You guys are also listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us right now, Maram Susli, political commentator, geopolitical analyst, and, of course, a chemist. And I always love that last part the best. Chemist, science.
I did work pretty hard to get that title.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's, just to make a side, Star Trek Discovery, horrible. At least the first season. I haven't seen the second one. But There's an episode where these guys come from Earth. They're in this place. All of these religions start to develop because they think Earth has been destroyed or something. And science, they lost the ability to necessarily have technology. So when Star Trek gets back, they have this conversation. They leave him a battery pack. And the church, for the first time in 200 years, lights up. This notion that these guys were in the dark with religion for all of these years, and something as insignificant and minor as a battery is able to light it up. I love the symbolism of it all. I just love that part. The science of it is the thing that I just like. Let me ask you this. From the standpoint of the things that are going on right now, if the United States did pull back, if Trump got what he wanted, if Trump pulled the troops out of Afghanistan, if Trump pulled the troops out of Syria, what happens in that region? Like, is it one of those things where other countries come in? Let's say, for example, the connection between Russia and Iran gets tighter, something that I think you would ideally expect. What happens? I mean, people in the United States, I think, especially neocons, in their head, in their conception of the world, if the United States is not there, the space gets filled with people who we consider to be enemies. From your standpoint, if we pulled back, if Trump got what he wanted, what happens?
Sure. It's easy. Well, for Syria, it's easy. It's easy to tell you. Right now, there's Turkey, Russia, and the U.S. inside Syria, and of course, the Syrian military. At the moment, the U.S. occupies the oil fields and the wheat fields, so Syria's people are basically starving and freezing to death. So once the Americans pull out, the Kurds are going to have to make a deal with the Syrian military, backed by Russia, which either they allow the Syrians and the Russians, to take back their own territory, in the Syrians' case, and move back into the town to protect them, or the Turks are going to invade and take more of Syria's territory. So once the Americans pull out, immediately the Kurds are, without a doubt, I mean, we saw that they almost did it before Lindsey Graham stopped them. They're going to make a deal with Damascus, and it's going to be peace. The Syrian military is going to go in, take over that land. The resources, the oil and the wheat, are going to be distributed evenly amongst the population. And that's going to prevent a Turkish invasion. The problem is the fact that the Americans are there allowed for a Turkish invasion, because the Turks are threatened by the Kurds, and Washington is giving them arms and backing them. So they're creating friction in the place. So when the Americans pull out of Syria, there's going to be a peace and prosperity in that region. With Afghanistan, it's interesting that, anything would be better than what there is right now. The whole war, you said, is based on a lie. Actually, I interviewed Major David McBride, which is a whistleblower here in Australia, that released the Afghan war crimes files, showing SAS soldiers committing war crimes. And he basically said, he was there, he served, multiple tours there. And he said every single year they would do a PowerPoint presentation and tell us that next year we're going to turn over a new leaf. It's going to be a turning point. We're going to win the war. And they were doing that for 20 years. And the most interesting thing is that the Taliban actually offered the United States a full surrender just before they went in. And I believe that the whole war was really about opium, because the Taliban was burning, they eradicated the opium fields. Now there's an opium skyrocketing all over Afghanistan because they need it to fuel the war. And where is all that opium going? It's getting dumped on the U.S. and European market. And in the U.S., you have a huge opium epidemic. I mean,
huge. It's no. And I mean, this also ties into the whole black budgets thing. This is something I've been meaning to look into for a while. But the idea that various intelligence agencies, I'll just name the main one that comes to mind, the CIA. Yeah, exactly. It relies on the sale of drugs because it's a black market. It gives them the ability to manipulate money, to manipulate their budget, basically, outside of the purview of the federal government. Of course, that was the part of the Iran-Contra scandal. It's part of this whole history of associations between intelligence agencies and drug trafficking around the world. Is that kind of where your mind was going with that stuff too, Maram?
Well, it's no coincidence that U.S. installed president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, which was there for like more than a decade. His brother was on the CIA payroll and was the biggest drug warlord in all of Afghanistan. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. So yeah, I think we know that the CIA makes money off drugs. They were deeply connected to the mafia as well in the U.S. So nothing has changed, and of course they don't care if it destroys their home country. It's all about just keeping it going, keeping the wheel spinning.
The president's
wars
men.
and drugs.
Yeah, they're the president's men. There's a book, Blowback, by Charles Johnson. He has a few lectures. It's an amazing speaker. The guy's dead now, unfortunately. But he made this point about how the CIA was just considered to be the president's men, that the president wasn't entirely supposed to know what they were doing because they're somewhat an illegal organization in regards to the way that they operate. And so, meaning if the president knew, then the president is responsible if the president knows that these guys are taking down governments and killing leaders of countries, and, if they knew that. But the assumption was that the CIA was fighting communism. And whatever they did, they were doing in the best interest of America. And it's just assumed that they were doing whatever they were doing. Like, it was very wild, like the way that these guys were doing. And even when they tried to make it where there was an association with the president, so somebody could have some kind of idea on what they were doing, even that didn't work. Like, especially, you see the Iran-Contra affair, for example, where Reagan was forbidden from involving himself in that war. And they still were able to get money by selling weapons to Iran in order to do it. So, yeah, it's the media always looks at this stuff and act like they're shocked when people bring up these assertions. And yet, there's a history of it. They act like the history of it doesn't exist.
They'll call it a conspiracy theory.
Yeah. It's a conspiracy theory. And it's like, but there was Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA was paying all of these people to influence the public affairs. There was Operation Paperclip, where we were bringing over Nazis for the Wackets program. There was, the program where they were using that organization, I think it was like in Cuba or something, to try to foment a revolution with a Twitter-type application. They do these things, so it's not like this stuff doesn't exist. They act like this stuff is just not there. Maram, I want to take a hard pivot into airstrikes that were in Gaza. And I think this took place either last night. I saw this on your Twitter feed, I believe, yesterday. Can you explain what happened? I mean, basically, with all of the election hijinks and everything else, and to be honest, when there's airstrikes, media don't typically cover it, especially if Israel is the one committing those airstrikes. But can you give us a heads up on what took place in Gaza?
Well, ironically, it has something to do with COVID-19, because what the Israelis were doing was blocking medical aid from getting inside the Gaza Strip. And their health system is being overwhelmed because the coronavirus is spreading and there's too many sick people that need ventilators. And this caused some agitation. And I think that there was some altercations between the Israelis and the resistance movements inside the Gaza Strip. And as a reaction to that, basically Israel just nuked the whole place with explosives, which they usually do. With missiles. But I think, the problem is that this happens so frequently that I can understand why the media would tire of it, that people don't want to pay attention to it. Because really the only time that it doesn't make sense to people if you don't provide them a historical context. And I think that it's important never to just say, Israel is bombing Gaza again, which we'll say every 6 months, we're going to have to say the same thing. It's important to just say that Israel is the Jewish version of ISIS, and they're in the Levant genociding the original inhabitants for a religious cult that wants the Messiah to come by changing Al-Aqsa Mosque into the Temple Mount and having a final battle in a city called Megiddo, where the word Armageddon comes from. It sounds crazy, but these people are crazy. I mean, if you look at a man who brings his wife and kids into a settlement right in the center of the West Bank, and with no concern over their safety at all, because at the end of the day, this is a religious quest. They want to take over this region, including the Golan Heights, because of a map, an old map 1,000 years ago that said that God promised the land. And I know this sounds like something that nobody would ever dare to say on any American radio station, but it's the facts. So I'm going to say it. I think people are ready to hear it now, whereas maybe they weren't in the past. I mean, we've seen this. You have people from all over the world from a particular religion, like Islam, for example, like Wahhabi Islam when it was ISIS. All these Muslims from all over the world decided that Syria was now going to be there. They're going to make a state in Syria. Same thing happened with Palestine, except it had many state backers, and because they sent a letter bomb to Will Truman and they bombed the King David Hotel, people were like, you know what, just have it, just have your state. And they legitimized it. So it's basically ISIS with legitimacy and nuclear bombs for some states, but it's never going to have legitimacy with all states.
So I don't want to. Here's the thing. I've heard that argument before. It seems to me that there's a much more secular motivation here, which is if you look at Netanyahu, he's a practicing atheist as far as I can tell. He and we've had Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, for instance, who's come on the show a number of times to talk about how the state of Israel, the very idea of Zionism is in some sense a rejection of the Jewish religion, because if you push ideas, for instance, of ethnic Judaism as opposed to religious Judaism, you're sort of taking a religion, you're making it about a race, you're diffusing things, and you're replacing the fundamental motivation. Anyway, we've only got about 30 seconds. What's your take, Maram?
No, sorry, I just want to agree with that, because like what ISIS was selling was not really Islam, and ISIS was selling both the idea that Islam was a nation as well as a religion. So I don't think I agree with you that some Zionists are secular, but at the end of the day, if they wanted the Jewish state to just be secular, they would have put it anywhere. But they wanted it in Palestine for a religious reason, and we can't ignore that either. And I'm not saying that religion is Judaism. No, real Judaism was never this way. This is a recent phenomenon, just like ISIS is a recent phenomenon. So I want to agree with you there.
Much more to talk about later. Thank you so much for joining us, Maram. That was Maram Susli, political commentator and geopolitical analyst. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we'll be back in just a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for our last hour this week, the last hour of the most disruptive show covering news and events across those divided states as well as across our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you heard that right, folks. That was no verbal tick. There was no error there. It is our last hour this week. We're going to be taking tomorrow and Friday off. So if you listen in and you don't hear us, please don't fret. We will be back on Monday. Everything is okay. The sky has not yet fallen. Although, it's 2020, so I wouldn't put it past you to assume as such. Anyway, in the news this morning, specifically in COVID news, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's the CDC, has updated its guidelines to recommend that Americans looking to travel abroad take a total of 3 COVID-19 tests before and after their flights. I'm just going to be clear here. That's a total of 3 COVID-19 tests. It's not 3 before and then 3 after. I'm guessing that part of this thing, you know what, I want to look into this a little bit more because I'm curious whether it's like it has to be 2 before and 1 after, or 1 before and 2 after. I really don't know. That's maybe a triviality that's a little bit too in the weeds for most folks, but I'm just curious about it. I wonder if this is partly because just in any one test is not going to be 100% accurate. And so if you're traveling, they want you to like confirm, okay, I've done it twice. Now I have, a significantly higher credence in the idea that I'm not sick, that I haven't been infected. Anyway, just a little quick supposition I'm throwing in there. At least 30 gyms and fitness studios in Philadelphia are demanding that the city allows them to stay open in order to keep their businesses alive. During the coronavirus pandemic, they created a group called the Philadelphia Fitness Coalition, which on Sunday launched an appeal to officials regarding the recent shutdown and new restrictions in the city. The coalition gathered outside of City Hall on Tuesday asking for a meeting with Mayor Jim Kenney. In El Paso County, Texas, they've ordered a new curfew starting Thanksgiving Eve as the city continues to grapple with rising COVID-19 cases and so many deaths that 10 additional morgue units have been brought in to accommodate the surge. The situation is so dire that 1,500 additional medical professionals and the National Guard have been deployed to help. Even inmates have been enlisted to assist in morgue operations as the death toll grows. The curfew took effect at 12:01 a.m. Wednesday and will run from 10 p.m. to 5 p.m. until November 30th, El Paso County Judge Ricardo Samaniego announced at a Tuesday afternoon news conference. In New Mexico, lawmakers yesterday passed a bipartisan coronavirus relief bill that will deliver a one-time $1,200 check to all types of unemployed workers and up to $50,000 for certain businesses. That is a big handout. The bill also provides smaller stimulus checks to immigrants without legal status in the country and dependents, as well as additional funds for food banks, virus testing, and contact tracing efforts. I'm curious. That sounds like, here's the thing, Jamarl. You initiate these programs and then you set yourself up, because if the program is not administered well, it inevitably arouses the suspicion of some sort of a scandal. $50,000, that's a large check saying to certain businesses. I wonder what businesses those are going to be, like what kinds of businesses, what the money's going to be used for. Anyway, I even called it a handout. I don't really want to be dismissive here because, again, as we've talked about so often, a lot of this stuff is desperately needed. You just want to make sure it's getting used well.
There's nothing wrong.
Anywho.
There's nothing wrong with handouts. Our society has gotten very bizarre on that front. Like on this notion of, look, I don't care if my taxes go to your kid getting an education. That kid, even if he does nothing with it, he's better off for it. And as a society, I want him to be better off for it. Not just that. Some of them, just almost like from probability, will get that education and do something awesome with it. And will create new jobs and create new opportunities and so forth. Yes, you can call it a handout. By the same token, we're also benefiting from it. I guess the sound of it, I don't know. The word, it gets really, there's a connotation with the word maybe. And maybe, I hope that's not entirely left to my own devices. I don't think I'm pulling that for myself. But it's desperately needed. And one way or the other, whether it's going to be administered great or not, all things being equal, I hope it's administered great. But the alternative is to not do it. Like, you're stuck with this notion of this is needed, this has to be done. The objective is to administer it well. But if it's not administered well, that's a failure, but it was needed. Does that make sense? It's like there's no way out of it in the sense. Either you do it or you don't. If you do it, there's always the opportunity or the chance that you could do it poorly. But you still got to do it. Michael Jordan is going to take the shot, regardless if he missed the last 15 shots. He has to take that shot because that's the only way he's going to potentially win the game.
Controversial. No, here's the thing. I'll be honest. There's so much there. I could argue this in so many different ways, or I could just agree with you and we could move on. One quick thing that I do want to push back on here real quick is and this is just because this is the example you gave. You used the education system. We don't have enough time for this one. Maybe we should come back to it at the end of the show if we have time then, because frankly, we've been taking calls and lately we've been getting a bunch of them. But just the education system. I don't like the education system, man. We could do so much better. Same thing with healthcare. I mean, you and I agree on healthcare. It's easy to talk about technology and how that could lower the cost of people getting treatments and potentially a lot of doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists, et cetera. People all around the spectrum there could be replaced, I'll put it bluntly, by better technology.
I agree.
At least a lot of the work they do could be replaced, lowering the doctor's workload, et cetera. Yeah. Same thing is 100% true with schools. And what I'm worried about is just that we have these bloated institutions filled with good people. I'm not trying to disparage that. People filled with good people by and large who nevertheless could be easily outmoded by technology for the betterment of all if we made some strategic R&D decisions and comprehensive institutional reform came on the other side.
1,000% agree with you. 1,000%. I guess my thing is, though, that just whatever that is from the standpoint of school, or whatever that is from the standpoint of healthcare, I mean, whatever conception you come up with that you think is better, I'm just talking about that. I'm putting an X there, whatever that variable is that we want to add in and say, okay, this is the better institution, or this is a better organization for this particular learning process. Whatever that is. I'm just saying that I am perfectly okay with my tax money going towards your kid doing well. That's all.
I hear you on that one. Yeah, man, I've sort of learned over the months of doing the show with you that there are ways in which I can frame things. I could be completely obstreperous and just disagree with you and be like, no, you're wrong. And I push back. Or I can frame things a little bit more comprehensively. It's not even like subtly. It's a little bit more like, with some nuance and some different sides, and we end up agreeing on the other side of it. In any event, this is the time to agree because we've got a bunch more headlines to get through. Let's get through them. Arizona Republican Party Chairwoman Kelly Ward filed a lawsuit Tuesday seeking an inspection of both mail-in ballot signatures and duplicated ballots in Metro Phoenix, alleging that election officials didn't give legal observers enough access to ballot processing. The lawsuit filed against President-elect Joe Biden's 11 electors in Arizona also alleged that some suburbs on the southeastern edge of Maricopa County had an unusually high number of duplicated ballots, and that the election results in that area were quote-unquote strongly inconsistent with voter registration and historical voting data. Ballots are duplicated when they are damaged or too illegible to run through a tabulator. The lawsuit alleged the software used in processing such electronic ballots was inaccurate and would quote-unquote pre-fill Biden's name on ballots more often than it did President Donald Trump. In Seattle, Mayor Jenny Durkan plans to sign a new city budget that includes an 18% cut to the city's police department funding, according to a statement issued by her office Tuesday. A vote by the Seattle City Council approved the budget Monday with a vote of 8-1. With Councilmember Kashama Sawant voting against, she had pushed for the full 50% cut to the police budget that protesters had demanded over the summer following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Prospective tourists and visitors from more than 20 countries, mostly in Africa, could pay as much as a $15,000 bond to obtain a U.S. visa under a new rule from the Trump administration. The requirements unveiled yesterday, the State Department said, are designed to send a message to certain nations to encourage their citizens to abide by the conditions of their U.S. visas. The State Department said it selected countries whose citizens have high rates of remaining in the U.S. after their visas have expired. Under the 6-month pilot program starting December 24th, U.S. consular officials could start requiring applicants for B1 and B2 visas who hail from the selected countries to pay a $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 bond. On Tuesday, Scotland became the first country to make menstrual products free in public facilities nationwide. The Scottish Parliament confirmed in a tweet on Tuesday that the bill had passed unanimously. According to the Parliament's website, the law requires the Scottish government to set up a universal system so that anyone in need of period products can get them for free. Schools, colleges, and universities will also be required to make free menstrual products available in restrooms. Local authorities and education providers will be responsible for ensuring free products are made available under the law. Indonesia's Anti-Corruption Commission said it arrested the country's fisheries minister on Wednesday amid an investigation into exports of lobster larvae. Maritime Affairs and Fisheries Minister Edi Prabowo was arrested upon arrival at the Jakarta Soekarno-Hatta International Airport from a working visit to the United States. The deputy chairman of the Corruption Eradication Commission, Nurul Gufron, told Kompas TV the arrest is related to lobster seed exports, quote unquote, without elaborating in comments aired on the station. He said investigators were still questioning Prabowo, and another announcement would be made later Wednesday. Prabowo earlier this year rolled back a ban on lobster larvae exports put in place by his predecessor. That decision sparked criticism from his predecessor and activists over sustainability concerns. And back in the United States, the Dow Jones Industrial has hit an all-time high. Wall Street busted through its latest milestone Tuesday when the Dow topped 30,000 for the first time, rose 454 points or 1.5% to 30,046.24. Investors were reportedly encouraged by progress in the development of coronavirus vaccines and news that the transition of power to President-elect Joe Biden is beginning, traders also welcomed word that Biden has selected Janet Yellen, a widely respected former Federal Reserve chair, as Treasury Secretary. I want to pause very briefly on this one. We've got one more headline to go through after this, of course, but just briefly, it's interesting. There's just a sort of interesting note here. When I'm reading this stuff, it's almost like the fact that these moves make the stock market rise means that they're inherently positive. If we in our society sort of evaluate the stock market, is this metric, this key quantitative measure of if you take it, and this is the big if you take it as the health or the stability or the vitality or the success of these different, this different huge undergirding factor in American society, our economy, then, the fact that these things make the Dow go up, the fact that these things, make that number higher means that they're good things. But those are a couple of key ifs in that sort of logical sequence. And I think at every joint, those ifs fail. So the fact that Janet Yellen, for instance, former Fed chair, is now going to be the Treasury Secretary under the Biden administration, that's what's expected to happen at least. The fact that that makes the stock market go up does not mean that that's a good thing. Likewise, the fact that President-elect Joe Biden is due to soon become President Joe Biden, the fact that makes the stock market go up, likewise, not necessarily a good thing. It's just interesting to note this sort of like emotional association factor here. Does that make sense, Jamarl?
It does make sense, but I think there may be something else that's added to this. We are not a United States. We've never been a United States. There's always been aspects of the country that are better off than others. The Native Americans weren't better off because of the Brits leaving. Blacks weren't better off because the Brits left. Slavery ended in Canada and many of these other places before they ended in the United States, meaning we've never been a United States even now. When you're looking at media, when you're looking at politicians, when you're looking at the market and so forth, all of these people have a dog in the hunt from the standpoint of the stock market because all of these people are rich. All of these people have portfolios. So when they're talking about the market and they're saying, oh, the market is going up, for them, it matters. For us, less so. So if you're looking at all of the people of means, well, those are the people who you see on television. Those are the people who you're seeing in media. The people who you're seeing, the talking heads, those people have a stake in the hunt. So it's like for them, yeah, the market is a big deal for them. But for the rest of us, the overwhelming majority, no. What, 80% of the stocks are held by 10% of the population? The upper 10%? So, I think the thing is, the reason why they give it so much attention is because for them, it matters. For the rest of us, less so. And yeah, they can compare it and conflate it with the wealth of the nation. Yeah, it's not, indicative of a good thing for all of us. It's indicative of a good thing for some of us. And I think that's the distinction.
Can't help but agree. With that, you know what? Let's close it out. Those are headlines. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are going into a break. And on the other side of this break, we're going to be back. It's going to be 4 of us in the room at once, at least virtually speaking. We're going to be joined by the co-hosts of the Common Censored podcast, Lee Camp and Eleanor Goldfield. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back in just a minute.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on the radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, definitely give us the like and share that audio or video. And if you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, by phone at 202-520-1037. 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. We will be taking calls at the last 15 minutes of the show, so definitely stick around. However, joining us, we have a room full of people, virtually. Eleanor, Goldfield, and Lee Camp. Eleanor Goldfield is award-winning documentarian, activist, journalist, and co-host of the podcast Censored. Her most recent documentary, quote, Hard Road of Hope, unquote, covers past, present radicalism in the resource colony known as the state of West Virginia. As for Lee Camp, he is the host and head writer of Redacted Tonight, airing on RT America, and A Moment of Clarity, his long-running video blog on YouTube. His book, Bullet Points and Punchlines, covers everything from the $21 trillion unaccounted for at the Pentagon and the U.S. imperialist coups to climate change, is available at leecampbook.com. Welcome, both of you, to the show. How are you guys doing?
Thanks for having us. We're good.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is coming up tomorrow. And I think the weirdest thing in the world is it's a time to be thankful. It is a time for all of us to join hands. Trump pardons the turkey, Obama pardons the turkey, while the indigenous community is being beat up and hit with rubber bullets and everything in Standing Rock. But we're supposed to be thankful. How on earth do we have a holiday like this where we completely ignore what it actually means and how it actually happened? Meaning this complete destruction and killing off of the Native American population. And we cover it with Thanksgiving. It's fascinating. Eleanor, what do you think?
I mean, it's fascinating in the sense that really, first of all holidays are made up. Christmas, for instance, takes the place of the pagan holiday Yule. But Thanksgiving is just a stereotypical way to sort of put a salve on the colonialist scars that really made this nation what it is. This nation is founded on genocide and slavery, and Thanksgiving is a way to whitewash that history, when in reality, the truth of the so-called Thanksgiving is the slaughter of indigenous peoples in this what is now called the United States. And a lot of indigenous groups have been organizing around this. For instance, Indigenous Action does No Thanks, No Giving, which is this year a virtual event to raise awareness and raise funds for Indigenous mutual aid. There's truthsgiving.org, for instance, that is asking folks to take the pledge to tell the truth about the Indigenous genocide and the continued colonization and oppression of Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island. And so it's an important day, and it's an opportunity for people to highlight the oppressive nature of the United States. And of course, as you noted before the break, Jamarl, this is not just Indigenous peoples. This includes Black folks and other peoples of color. So it's an opportunity to set the record straight and separate myth from fact.
I just wish, it's funny, when I was growing up, we used to have our plays, and we used to do our plays, and, we would have all of these things about Columbus, and we would have the Pilgrims, and the Pilgrims would be sitting there, the Native Americans would bring the corn, and everybody sitting at the table. And this is like what we experience, this level of indoctrination, where nations, to some degree, I would imagine all have their beginning myths and those things that bring those things together. And like you said, it's the salve over this kind of colonialist project. The communities and the groups that are here now, meaning the Native American communities, I remember there was some report that said Biden was elected or was helped to be elected by Native Americans in the various states. How have we treated those Native Americans in the various, let's say, recent history, especially with the pipelines, especially with the oil pipelines going through their particular territories, if we're talking about North Dakota, and we're seeing some of these things actually leak into their territory. So despite this notion of Thanksgiving and we're supposed to be better people now, we're supposed to have grown and learned, we still are shafting the indigenous communities in this country, right, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is the original sin of America, is the genocide of the native peoples. And, that's why it's so important to create these myths to cover over that. as it is important to create myths to cover over the horrors of slavery, or many of them, in a similar way. And, the fact that many Native Americans may have voted for Joe Biden, I don't know the actual numbers, but, that really just speaks to kind of general misinformation and propaganda that goes across America. It doesn't matter what type of people you are. Many people in America are miseducated as to what is really going on in this country, what Joe Biden and Donald Trump and our system really stands for. And, when people are truly exploited and oppressed, you can often get a certain percentage of them to be thankful for the pennies you give them to dig their own graves. So, the fact that people might be thankful that this or that happened as they are oppressed, as they've been exploited and had their families and lives and communities torn apart, is not really a surprise if the propaganda is effective, which, as we know in our history and certainly now, it is incredibly effective. The corporate ownership of the mainstream airwaves is really glosses over, covers over, pastes over everything.
So is there some way, so silence speaks volumes, if we're using the solid day for propaganda, and that historically seems to have been how it's used, I agree. We should, if not try to blot it out, at least try to change it. And that seems to be the latter seems to be the tack that a lot of folks are taking with this one. Is there a way to do that and then simultaneously get some of the salubrious effects of like gratitude, which on a deep level is just good for people to feel, if you view your life, if you view your opportunity to participate in this dynamic system in some sense as like a gift given to you by the universe, if not a creator or whatnot. Can we combine the two? Is there some resolution of the two that you see, or what's your take, Eleanor? Eleanor?
Yeah, so I think, I talked about this yesterday actually as well. It's kind of like Santeria. Santeria is basically the acculturation of Catholicism with other, quote unquote pagan or polytheistic religions. And I think Thanksgiving can be the same way. Cultures evolve all the time. The only cultures that don't are the ones that are dead. And I think this is an opportunity to take a day that, yeah, absolutely. It's great to have a day where we give thanks, maybe not this year, but other years where we gather with larger groups of people and we mention what we're thankful for, and then the next day not go out and buy a bunch of crap we don't need, but that we actually take that time to reflect. I think that that's great. It's the same thing with I was brought up with a Jewish culture, and the same day of the Day of Atonement, to reflect on what we've done, how we can do better, how we can be better. I think in that sense, these holidays are a good thing, and I think that it's just important that as part of this reflection, we reflect on the history of this nation and how we can do better, not as a nation, but as people in our various communities, how we can stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks or, BIPOC people in general, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, how we can pedestal the voices and the experience of the most marginalized people in what is now called the United States.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I love that, because it's like the evolution of the holiday. It's this recognition of, look, we did some very, very bad things, and those things should not be ignored as we try to be better people and have almost like the holiday evolve into something that's a thing of remembrance, as opposed to this salve or this ignoring of the true reality of the events that took place. There's also this other thing on perspective, Lee, where there are two perspectives that are taking place. There's the person who basically won and was able to take advantage, and there was the group that took or ended up in bad ends. And it seems that we have this weird thing of only taking one perspective. We won, and ignoring or acting as if the other one didn't matter. So we would raise up and put people on the dollar. We would have Andrew Jackson ignoring how horrible he was to the Native Americans. And one of the things that took place in 2020, it seems to be this recognition of that. Meaning this thing of trying to consolidate the various vagaries of our history in the context of the various groups that are in there now. And this seemed to be the trigger was George Floyd. But when you got into people pulling down statues of Columbus, people pulling down, I don't know if Andrew Jackson, but you had a lot of people having these conversations. Do you think this is going to last? And do you think this digs deep? And do you think for something like Thanksgiving that the things that took place from the standpoint of Floyd and this kind of reconciliation of American history, to the degree that it was reconciled, will have somewhat of an effect going forward on Thanksgiving? Or do you think COVID at this point has just blotched everything up?
I think it could have a lasting effect. I think these are the first steps, and they are kind of baby steps, but these are the first steps towards people realizing what our past actually consists of. And you know, oftentimes people that are first waking up, they need kind of an in. They need an introduction to being aware of just how much we're lied to in our history books, on our television news, just everywhere. And sometimes people just need that little spark, that little flame that ignites this. Hold on, if I'm being lied to about that, then what about everything else? And Columbus, you know, the reality of Columbus being a genocidal rapist, and, you know, as he writes in his own journals, that type of thing can create that spark, can be that spark. And so I think the statues is a step in the right direction, even though I grew up in the midst of that, you know, Monument Avenue, Richmond, Virginia, it's all Confederate soldiers. That was my
You grew up in Richmond, Virginia also? I didn't know that. So did I. Monument Avenue. I used to go in it like every other day.
Richmond, Virginia, and you know, I went to Freeman High School. The mascot was the Confederate Rebels, and it once you kind of have that spark, it awakens you to the entire world of propaganda and lies that we're fed. It's so important. You know, the number of people that I've heard tell me they first woke up when I did a video about the only trial ever held on Martin Luther King's death, showed that he was killed by government agencies and not by James Earl Ray. The only trial, like that kind of thing, woke them up to a massive reality that's not just about MLK. It's about the entirety of our propaganda.
The Richmond, Virginia thing is wild because it took me a while to come around to the statue stuff because I was so accustomed to it. Like, it's everywhere. Yeah. I don't know if you haven't been in Virginia, you go, there's Monument Avenue. Monument Avenue basically has one Confederate statue after the next. I remember there was this big fight of whether or not to put an Arthur Ashe statue up, and people were like, no, we don't want him up, or Bill Bojangles Robinson. But the majority of those statues are basically Confederate monument statues. I did not know you lived in Richmond, Virginia, Lee. Wow, a Richmond native. Let's do this. Let's take a break. I think Lee is going to be leaving us. Eleanor, however, is going to continue to stay with us. So Lee Camp, host and head writer for Redacted Tonight, airing on RT America and Moment of Clarity, his long-running video blog on YouTube. He also has a book, Bullet Points and Punchlines, which covers everything from the $21 trillion unaccounted for at the Pentagon to U.S. imperialist coups to climate change. And it is available on leecampbook.com. Eleanor Goldfield will be joining us and continuing to join us, award-winning documentarian, activist, journalist, and co-host of the podcast Censored. Her most recent documentary, Hard Road of Hope, covers past, present radicalism in the resource colony known as the state of West Virginia. That is a mouthful, but we will be back with Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You folks are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And our guest for this segment, continuing our conversation from the last, Eleanor Goldfield. She is an award-winning documentarian, activist, journalist, and co-host of the podcast Censored, along with Lee Camp. Her most recent documentary, Hard Road of Hope, covers past and present radicalism in the resource colony known as the state of West Virginia. Eleanor, you're telling us last time you were on about success, continuing success, spreading that documentary. I'm curious, do you have it? And just checking up on it. Anything else lined up? Any other projects coming up, or right now is it just still working on that? Which again, very successful documentary. Don't mean to diminish that in any way, but Eleanor.
No, it's funny because I realized this back when I had bands and we would release an album. They're like, "Great album. When's the next one coming out?" I'm like, "Do you have any idea how much work that was?" I almost died. But no, I get it, and it's very flattering to have folks ask because it obviously means that they would like more content. And right now, I'm doing screenings of the film for organizational and educational purposes, which is really, really rad to see folks wanting to use the film for that. And in terms of next projects, I mean, the ideas are my cup overfloweth. There's so many trips that we're going to happen this year, including going to the Pacific Northwest to see the logging fight that's happening up there with the old growth forests, Navajo Nation, which of course is, even before the pandemic was struggling with, forced relocations and mining operations and the like. There's, even just looking back at West Virginia or places like Ohio and the fracking fight that's going on there. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of despicable stories that need to be brought into the light.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting gamut there. Interesting. Yeah. Like a bunch of different, they all are ecological in nature as far as I can tell. I mean, but they're also cultural. What's the focus? Why is that? Why are those the focal points? What brings you to it?
I think I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that, climate change is not an issue. It is the stage on which all other issues take place. Basically that, whatever we're doing, whatever we're fighting for or against, is extremely, decided by the climate change that we're already experiencing, right? These extreme hurricanes, extreme floods, droughts, extreme heat waves, etc. And so these stories of the continued destruction of ecosystems, which of course include humans, we are part of the ecosystems, whether we try to extract ourselves or not. These stories are so vital in this moment. Where we actually have chances to mitigate the destruction and mitigate the extremity of the climate change that we are facing. So I feel personally, and I came into activism through environmental issues. So I feel that for me personally, it's important to highlight these issues, and then also, of course, highlight the intersections, whether that be Indigenous rights, whether that be public health, whether that be the sort of systemic racism that folks are dealing with, and how these all intersect at environmental issues and climate change. So for me personally, that's a very important thing to discuss and show.
Explain something to me, and I don't necessarily know the answer, which is why I'm asking. What is the distinction between activists and regular people? Meaning, why does it seem to burn in some but not in others? What is the thing that you see that makes you say, I have to do something about this? I have to get up, and whatever I was typically doing in order to, make a living for myself, or whatever I was going to do needs to be supplemented into this particular thing that demands my attention. What is it about that particular event and the way it burns in you that doesn't necessarily seem to burn in others to make that a priority?
Well, I think the answer is manifold because, everybody has their own specific reasons and unique life ways that bring them to the path that they're on or to change that path. I think one of the things is that, I felt that from a pretty early age that I was seeing things that I didn't like, and the response from people around me was, "We'll do something about it." Not like, "Oh, the government will fix this for you," or "Don't worry, little one, we'll figure it out." Basically, if you see something, do something. Kind of, taking that ridiculous propagandistic idea from the state. And I think the other thing is that I have had a privileged life in the sense that I haven't had to work, 3 jobs to, support a family. I was able to stay in school. I didn't have a lot of health problems that disallowed me to focus on things like this. So there have been several notes of privilege that have allowed me to follow this. But I think one of the things is really a psychological one that I spoke to a psychologist who studies these kind of things. And she said that rationalization is a built-in effect of humans. We have monkey brains because that's our history, and our ape brains have evolved to avoid trauma. And so we do something that's called rationalization. Oh, well, Biden's actually not that bad. Look, he said something nice about Black people. And let's just forget the 94 crime bill, for instance. So we rationalize in order to save ourselves from the reality that is much more traumatic and much more painful. And something that she said that activists tend to do is that activists find a way to fix it. Activists don't, instead of rationalizing, activists look for the possibility in that horror. And this is something that she said she didn't really know why, but she said that this is something interesting that we as organizers can work to impart on other folks. So, for instance, instead of saying, "Oh, all is lost, we're all going to die in a tidal wave of climate change," oh, hey, here are some ways to mitigate the effects of climate change. Making it possible allows people to enter into these spaces of organizing and fighting back. And I'll also just say that, something that Kilu Nyasha, former Black Panther, said to me. She said, fighting for liberation liberates oneself. And I think that's the other thing, is that there's so much wrong with the world, but the feeling that the only way to address that is to fight and also build alternatives. Like the Zapatistas said, I want a world where many worlds are possible. What kind of world do we want? Dreaming that and then actually starting to build it. What's stopping us? And that sort of these actions are liberatory in and of themselves. And so I think, in terms of what actually stops other people, I think there are, machinations of the capitalist system that stop people from even having the time or energy to pay attention. And that is something that, community organizers work on as well. But I think, there's nothing that separates me. Like, if you were to open me up, there's nothing that separates my brain from anybody else's who isn't a radical or an organizer. It's just a matter of having the opportunities to step into these spaces, having people that were able to and willing to help me along this path and continue to walk with me on this path, and just trying to get to more people, to engage people on that level. Because again, we all share this same oppression. It looks different for other folks, of course, but we all share this, and making these solutions possible, fighting in that liberatory way where we are also building solutions for the fall of capitalism. These are all things that we can and do share. And organizing is just a way of manifesting that.
And what do you think, Eleanor, thanks again for being with us. What do you think actually breaks people out of this sort of conceptual gridlock that they get stuck in, where you're talking about the difference between seeing a problem and rationalizing it versus seeing it and sort of trying to, another way to look at this is trying to rationalize it in reality, trying to actually change the structure of reality so that the problem doesn't exist anymore, instead of trying to change the structure of your thoughts to sort of make it fit so that you don't have to see the problem, you don't have to fit yourself into it in that way. You don't have to be emotionally aware of the problem as it exists in the real world. What do you think separates the two? How do you think people, in other words, another way to look at this, if you go from introspection to extrospection for a second, how do you think you can move people, assuming they are willing to be moved, which is a big if, from seeing something and assuming that it's okay or assuming that it's inevitable to seeing something and believing that it can be changed? What's that process like, Eleanor?
I mean, I think it looks different for everybody. I've done a lot of work in the South and with poor white communities, which are stereotypically, hotspots for extreme racism, sexism, white supremacy. And these people don't need, just like anybody else, these people don't need to be told what it feels like to be oppressed. They just need to be brought into a welcoming space that says, hey, actually, your feelings of oppression, your feelings of hatred are actually tied to the same liberatory struggle that the folks that you blame, Black people of color, indigenous folks, etc., immigrants. So it's going to look different for different people, And I think that that's part of the art of organizing, the creativity behind organizing is meeting people where they're at, and it's not about dumbing yourself down or talking to people like they're kids, because that's just derogatory and pedantic, but it's about talking to people about what this means for their lives. It's kind of like the question of how do you talk to people about war when it feels so far off? Well, hey, look at how much money is going into the military-industrial complex, and did you know that a fraction of the war budget could actually give free healthcare to everyone in this country? And hey, isn't your family struggling with healthcare costs right now? Conversations like that really throw into focus how these things are interconnected. And that's really the highlight is connecting these issues to people's daily lives. And not to say that it's okay that people don't feel empathy for the people that are being crushed by U.S. empire. But I think it's important when we're talking about this entrance into activism or organizing or what have you, that we talk to people about things that they can relate to personally. Because that's just how people operate. People operate in the bubbles of their family or their smaller communities. And it's important to draw those connections so that we can have these stronger networks of solidarity that span a lot of space and a lot of different various communities.
When you went to West Virginia, how did you ingratiate yourself to the people there in order to speak with them? Because oftentimes, like for example, West Virginia started to vote heavily Republican, and for obvious reasons, right? I mean, basically, it's we're talking about energy, coal, like oil, gas, basically dirty energy. And you have Democrats who are basically saying, we're no longer going to do that, which means we're going to get rid of those jobs. And Rahm Emanuel is like, yeah, they got to learn code. Well, of course, if you're talking about eliminating the way that I go about my life, I'm going to be against that. How did you go and have the conversations with the various people there in order to kind of get an idea of what they were experiencing in their life in that particular mining state?
Yeah, I think it's about meeting people where they're at and doing more listening than talking. I think this is a problem that I think oftentimes, particularly environmental organizing and activists have, is that they walk into a space and they say, you're bad because you're a miner. Well, that's no way to start a conversation. And understanding that, for instance, if you work in the dwindling amount of mining jobs that are available to people, your choice was either that or work at Walmart. And there's quite a significant financial difference there. If you've got a family, I think any one of us faced with, feeding our family or not feeding our family would probably choose the former. So understanding that these people, again, this shared oppression, these people are not, the Jeff Bezos that we should be directing our ire towards, or the coal barons. These people are the ones that are also getting crushed underfoot. So I think that it's about, and I wouldn't say that I ingratiate myself. I walk in there and they're like, oh, are you one of them liberals? And I'm like, absolutely not. I hate liberals. And they're like, okay, cool. And then we sit down and we have a conversation, and they soon realize that, oh, I'm actually left of liberal. But as opposed to walking in there and waving, like a anarchist flag and saying, we have to smash the state, I don't start the conversation like that. You start the conversation by asking people, hey, like, how do you feel about this or that or the other? And how would you feel about working in renewables or, something like that? Like just getting a gauge to see how folks feel about a specific topic before you lambast it. And, this is just about being able to connect with people. When you walk into a situation and you've already decided that this person's your enemy, well, then you're not going to get anywhere. If you walk into a situation and you say, hey, I want to work with this person, I want this person to work with me, then your conversation is going to flow accordingly.
Very cool. And I didn't mean anything negative by ingratiate. I just meant, how do you get to the point where you can have that level of communication and that level of dialogue? That's all I meant. But no, perfect answer. I love the answer. Eleanor Goldfield, award-winning documentarian, activist, journalist, and co-host of the podcast Censored. Her recent documentary, Hard Road of Hope, covers past, present radicalism in the resource colony known as the state of West Virginia. And Eleanor, thank you again for coming on. We are going to take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back for the wrap in just a moment.
Fault Lines.
Yo! So Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our phone lines are open. That means you can call in if you'd like to. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Quick note, I'll try to remind you again in about 13 or so minutes here, more like 12 really. We're not going to be on the air tomorrow or Friday. We've got both of those days off. Don't fret. We will be back on Monday. Everything is okay. But yeah, we're taking a couple of day break over here. You will notice that we were not absent from the air back on Veterans Day or Armistice Day, as it was sometimes called. We parlayed that into a 2-day break coming up at the end of this week. So again, we're going to be off for 2 days, back on Monday. I'm just being real clear about this so that nobody has any room for hesitation, uncertainty, or doubt. Our phone lines, again, though, are open. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, 202-521-1320. Jamarl, how's it going, man?
So far, so good. Actually, not too bad. I'm looking forward to the 2-day vacation. My wife, now we're not going to be anywhere, so there's that. I mean, we're basically going to be in the house. But my wife has gotten, she's going to be cooking a Thanksgiving dinner. And we are probably going to get some Beyond Civilization going for like hours.
Oh man, by the way, I think the yuppies call that a staycation.
Is that what that is? Is that what that is? Is that what that
That's
is?
the neologism.
Well, I mean, it's like you can't go anywhere. I don't want to take any chances. She doesn't want to take any chances. And so it's like everybody's kind of in the house. I have been on this Beyond Civ kick for the last, few weeks where I've craved playing the game. And it's like when you're playing multiplayer, it makes it that much more engaging. And for some reason, I feel like there's a closeness that's imparted by us playing together. If that makes sense. I know it sounds real strange, but it feels like, there's a, like we're doing something together. Like it's on our bucket list to finish the game together. So there's that.
I know, and we talked about that, and I hope here's the thing: we've got other callers, so I'm going to segue out of this. But I would genuinely ask you about some of the details of the campaign you have going. Never played that game, but I've been a fan of.
You should join. The only thing you would need is to get the game,
man.
And then you could kind of join in. You could take one of the civilizations, and all of us can have a go at,
Here's the problem: is that I was literally looking into this because I was like curious about this. I heard this come out a number of years ago, but I wasn't playing games at the time. And I was looking, and supposedly it's like the version of it that I would have to buy from Steam specifically is really buggy. Like a bunch of people have problems installing it because it's a slightly older game.
No. So it's
a hurdle.
I'm
not gonna crash your game.
No. It's called Beyond Civilization, and there's an attachment to it called like River something. Beyond Civ by itself sucked. Like when it first came, it sucked. It was horrible. When they added the association with the the update to it, perfect. The game became playable. Like I literally didn't play the game until they put on the attachment pack. Yeah. So it became awesome.
I see.
And my wife ends up loving it herself. And
let's talk about it more often. No, this is charming, but we can't call it. I always feel bad if we call for calls and then we just talk about our random BS for 5 minutes.
Right.
So often. Anyway, we have Louise calling in from Virginia. And again, our phone lines are open, 202-521-1320. Your last chance to call this week. Louise from Virginia, you're on the air. What's going on, Louise?
Yes, Shane, it's great to hear you and Jamarl, and I hope you have a good holiday. You're not going to like this, and it goes completely against political correctness, and I'm really terrified to be calling in and saying it, but
this is great.
In the interest, well, then you can defend you can try to defend what I'm about to say, Shane. and I could defend it, but I'm afraid to, because I think you'll jump in down my throat. In the interest of fairness and truth and the peace we all say we want, and we do, we genuinely mean it, it would behoove all of us politically correct people and progressive and all that sort of ideological junk to admit that the Confederacy had a cause. They had a good cause. And to say what it was, even if you don't agree, to say what it was.
Are you talking about the states' rights thing?
Yes, the Confederacy and defending their homes, and actually Lincoln was the beginning of empire.
Louise, states' right to do what?
Oh man,
Louise, I'm just asking. States' right to do what?
No. Here's the thing. This is one of those things. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is one of those arguments.
Is that not a fair question? A state's right to do what?
Of course, it's a fair question.
What is the states? What did those states want?
They, at least in part, slavery.
Yes.
Just to be clear, that's
the large part.
100% what you're going with.
They wanted the right to hold slaves.
No, I know, man. I know that's where you're going, but I also understand what she's saying. She's talking about like the increase of centralized power and this move over to like an Anglican, not Anglican, an Anglo tradition of doing things, this sort of centralizing monarchical force. I feel like you can have both of those sides in the conversation, and maybe it's just I don't know, maybe the whole like Confederacy versus the Union thing is the wrong frame for it because it immediately sets people's minds on edge. But I kind of hear where both of you are going.
How do they escape what the states wanted to do and why this popped off? It was very clear in the writings back then that this was about slavery. This casting after the fact of trying to cover it as something else. No, it was very clear. The states' rights.
I kind of want to protect Louise because she was very clearly, you heard her. She was so.
I didn't jump down her throat. I didn't go after her. I just asked her one sentence. States' right to do.
I know.
That's all. I didn't jump down her throat.
And then she hung up.
Look, it's fault lines, right? We allow people the space to kind of make their points and make their arguments. Nobody's going to attack her for it.
No, you didn't. I don't feel like you did. That's just where that conversation goes. Yeah. And that's why, like, it's the same thing with any argument between like nationalism, quote unquote, and globalism, quote unquote. I'm not sure that's the right frame for the political conversation about like central, like you could add localism, for instance. Maybe there's a scale between localism and globalism where nationalism is somewhere in between. Yeah. And we're all off base. We're operating a little bit top heavy when it comes to the level of, anyway, that's my spiel.
Or but maybe it's the labels.
I just feel like there are these.
Maybe the issue is the label doesn't necessarily fulfill what we want to explain by. Like, because I don't see anything wrong with a country that says it is our best interest to use the oil for the people of this country. Or if you're in Bolivia, it is in our best interest to use the lithium for the best interest of the people in this country. Meaning, we're not just going to sell this off to these private corporations. We're going to make sure that the workers in our country are going to get, experience and technical development, etc. That's also nationalistic. You know what I mean? Like, it's the language goes.
You use the word nationalism, Jamarl. Isn't that Hitler? Isn't that
right? But that's kind of my point, right? Like,
of course.
Because the United States would say, well, if you want to use the lithium for the people, you're being too nationalistic, and that's nonsense. They just want to get their hands on the materials. Whereas there's a medium between this stuff. The language is far too slippery, and it doesn't necessarily give us exactly what we always want. It's always like we have to add modifiers and adjectives to get exactly what we're trying to get to. I'm looking for the brain device, man. Where's Elon Musk? Where you can put the little chip in the back of our heads, we can explain and understand exactly what the other individual wants.
About 30% of the chat room's head just exploded when you threw that conversation in there. And I'm right, and probably for good reason. Yeah, I've never been. The idea of the Neuralink is okay. That's cool enough, whatever. But there's this whole thing about you've watched Star Trek a bunch, man. You got the Borg. That's the whole fear that their skin is gray and they have these very clunky devices sticking out of the corners of their foreheads, and that's not only not a good look, but it's indicative of their deep, villainous nature. Anyway,
I hate to tell you this, but a corporation is every bit as much as the Borg. How is it not? You don't need the neural chip for it. They are very specific in what they want. Everything else is subordinate to the objectives of the corporation. They push very hard with this notion of taking more and becoming more and monopolizing, et cetera, and spreading out. How is it not different? When it leaves the country, it goes looking at other countries to get more resources and supplies and bring more people on. Same difference.
At least when you go home to your family and your family life, and you go onto your computer and ignore your family, and you go on Twitter and you're being advertised the same stuff that you would be on TV, at least then, in a sanctuary of your own home, you have the freedom of thought and action that comes with the American dream. No, I'm just making too much fun.
If you do something that goes off the rails, your boss emailing you at 2 a.m, like.
Oh yeah, that's happening these days.
I feel you. There's our differences. Yes, the Neuralink, there's a difference, of course. I'm just trying to push back on this. It's like, it does have these kind of qualities that it's like, well, there are similarities, right? And you can even make an argument. Is Starfleet itself look like the Borg in the way that it appropriates other nations and other governments and countries and everything else and bring them onto this one umbrella? We have callers. I'm sorry.
That's their shadow, man. That's their Jungian shadow. Yeah, we do have callers. We've got Tarif from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's going on?
I have two comments, but before I get to the comments, Trump, if you want to help out the whistleblowers such as myself, joining signs to everybody else, and also release the documents on everything. My first comment is dealing with the EPA. I received something yesterday from the EPA. They changed my tracking number to something else. They're going to give it to another agency to process it. So that's going to be another 2 years. It's been 2 years trying to get 2 simple emails, three simple emails, which I have yet to get from the EPA dealing with my case. My last comment is dealing with, of course, I need a lawyer pro bono. I would like to have Linwood or Sidney Powell, Joe DeVilla, or somebody else to deal with my case while they can expedite my FOIA request, and also put out a hotline number in the greater New Orleans area and Houston area, asking people for any evidence dealing with Michael E. DeBakey dealing with the contaminated water. If they ever spend any time at Michael E. DeBakey Veterans Hospital in Houston, and call this number. And also, do you have any information on this guy on a 30-second commercial, right? My face, my name, his name was smeared. Did anybody send y'all anything talking about he was a bad guy, anything like that? So trying to build up a case for me to help me out to take on Mike E. DeBakey VA Hospital. That would be great, but I need a good lawyer for that. That's all I want to say.
Tarif, thank you for the call. You know what? I'm going to close it out, folks. Tarif, thank you for the call. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. One last quick note. We are not going to be on the air tomorrow or Friday. We're going to be off. It's not just a federal holiday. We're taking an extra day to fill in for the Veterans Day holiday. We got these 2 consecutive vacation days coming up. We will be back on Monday, however. So that's, what is that, 5 days from now? We'll be back then. Please stay tuned to listen to us then. I hope everybody has
connected. All right. My signal dropped. I'm not sure if this is going to show, but if it does, I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. You guys will be seeing us tomorrow and the day after. We're going to do a show on Thanksgiving. Tomorrow, I think we're going to try to do the contributor appreciation. We haven't done this in a couple of months. As you guys know, I ended up, falling off of a cliff, basically. There was to put it in a nutshell, there was a bunch of stuff that went on all at once within the course of the last 2 months that between putting me in the hospital and putting me out of commission from the standpoint of doing the channel. And rough 2 months, but things are getting back to normal. So tomorrow on Thanksgiving, we're going to be doing a contributor appreciation. It's going to be kind of the restart of the appreciation ceremonies. I think Ms. Thomas is going to be joining me for it. And so that should be a lot of fun. Also, we're going to be doing this on Friday. So even though Fault Lines is not going to be appearing, we will be doing shows. Probably not at 7 in the morning, but we'll be here. So I'm going to say like, share, and of course, definitely, entirely subscribe. And there is something else that I am supposed to be doing. I think it was Wesley. Hold on. 1 second. Also, I'm going to be doing additional shows for today. So you guys are going to be seeing me within the next hour or so doing the news. There's very many stories that are out. Wesley Walker. I'll catch up later. Try to enjoy the time off, guys. Aw, thank you, Wesley. And he gives the Vulcan hand signal. All right, guys. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. And, of course, subscribe. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. definitely enjoy your holiday, however you define it. I know there's some people who celebrate Thanksgiving in the traditional sense. I personally love Thanksgiving, even though I recognize that it needs to be somewhat evolved into acknowledging what the fuck actually took place, as opposed to this kind of sanitized version of it. But enjoy your days, guys. I'll talk to you in a few. Like, share, and definitely hit the subscribe button and ensure that your button is pressed. I think it's a different button on top of it to make sure that you get the announcements. But definitely make sure you're subscribed.